Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D in WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of what if Deku gets himself into a sticky situation. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Like all spiders, Aranea's Philistata has a body of two parts. Its diminutively small abdomen holds its book lungs and the bulk of its paunch, whereas the arachnid's pate is dominated by two large eyes facing forwards for acuminated binocular vision, beneath a pair of tiny tufts that crown the head like horns. Philistata is fuzzy with filaments in broken patterns of brown umber and Stygian black. To predators, it looks more dead leaf than live prey. Now, it's just dead. A crowbar wedges its way into the spider's home, chiseled pinch point splitting Philistata's two parts while simultaneously withering webbing that had been strung by it. Prying deeper into the dark and compact space of circuitry wires, the crowbar begins to bend from its point of entry. Stainless steel peels back and exposes light to the compartment. A squeak followed by a pop is due to the paneling of Philistata's former house being broken into. What's inside the metal box is exposed to the invader. Bent over an ATM, crowbar in the hand of the culprit, is a man. He's flanked by three others, though they're empty-handed unlike him. The one doing the prying grunts with effort, sweat dripping beneath the heat of his face mask. It's bad enough that it's summer. His tank top doing nothing to stop his tan from getting any darker. Doing all this manual labor can leave a guy breathless. He drags a calloused hand through his slick blonde hair, trying to shield himself from the sunbeams of the bright morning. "Deku, give me some shade with your blubber, will ya?" Blondie grumbles and grouses with a glance back over his shoulder to address the biggest member of their group, a portly guy with a mutation quirk of some kind that makes his mouth oversized grimaces, the harness on his head clenching with the expression, "He must be Deku." It's the least it could do to help. Tan Man keeps ragging on his partner while increasingly adding ire to his tone. "I told you, it's not blubber. My mom says I'm just big-boned." Deku positions himself behind Blondie despite sharing his grievance over being used as a human sunblock. As a corpulent Goliath, he casts a broad shadow that spreads over more than just the ATM. His triangular pig ears twitch with irritation now that the sun is boring into his back. The other two of the four crooks stay on the sidelines, one of which sporting an orange mohawk and the other a tall flat-top flaunting brown hairs bound by a blue headband. Ginger Guy nudges his partner in crime in the ribs with his elbow to get his attention, followed by a head nod gesture as though to say watch this. Headband adjusts his shades like that'll help him see better, a grin forming on his face. "Funny, cause that's what your mom said about me last night." Mohawk Man smirks behind his green mouthpiece. His brunette buddy snickers, sunglasses nearly sliding off and winding up requiring another adjustment. Deku twists his head, flabby rolls of flesh creasing under his neck as he shoots a scowl over his shoulder. "Not cool, guys, not cool." He watches the pair behind him double over with laughter now, Mohawk having to prop himself up against their getaway vehicle. That white truck so happens to be his mom's pickup that he's borrowing by the way, so the least they could do is show a little respect. He begrudgingly grumbles under his breath rather than waste it telling them that though. The bronze blonde of the bunch rolls his eyes as he finishes cracking the ATM's small safe lock system, ignoring his gang members' antics. Just a little more pressure applied with the crowbar and he thinks he can get it to completely pop open. It's just hard to get a good grip. His hands slick with sweat and all, he pats his palms on the legs of his pants. He bites his upper lip as he concentrates on reasserting his hold, tasting the bitter saltiness of the sweat that he didn't wipe from his face. Deku isn't doing a very good job of being an umbrella shade for him anymore. Too transfixed on doing all of the work by himself, he doesn't notice when a new shadow descends upon him. Upside down, gripping a web line that lowers him into the same vicinity as the ATM robbers, is a boy clad in red and blue. Mohawk and Shades choke on their laughter, pointing at the newcomer on the scene. Deku turns his neck back towards the bank machine to see what they're seeing. A spider-themed figure waves nonchalantly, still strung in an inverted position. "Hey guys, how's it hanging?" Deku responds by unintelligibly screaming, full weight shuffling back with heavy stomps of his feet. The two that had been carrying on behind the giant dart in opposite directions to avoid a collision with him. Deku slams into his mother's pickup truck instead, creating a huge indentation thanks to his body mass. His friends wince, feeling sympathy for him. Man," Deku whines when he thinks about how much trouble he's going to be in when his mom sees what he did to her vehicle. "That bad? Huh." Two white lenses where the spider-themed interloper's eyes should be narrow to convey some sort of emotion, startling the ATM burglars further. He sounds as young as he looks, small size made smaller by his poised form. However, that doesn't stop the bandit wielding the crowbar from standing up and taking a swing at the meddling pest, lenses returning to their originally wide default state. The boy reflexively reacts to avoid being walloped on the head. He bounds backwards, performing a semi-somersault. before sticking his landing by literally sticking to the wall behind him. It's a shocking sight to behold, making Bronze Blondie gasp in awe. Tan Man does a double take when his crowbar is snatched away from him by a web line. Sticky string fired from the red and blue boy's wrist. The spider-themed problem for the crooks continues, acting casual, as though one of them didn't just attempt to assault him. He asks as modestly as he is mousy, "Mind if I test out some material on you?" Now relieved of his crowbar, the bunch's bronze leader backs up. That gives their pesky opponent more time to quip. The boy tugs on the front of his red and blue suit, elastic fabric stretching from where his gloved fingers grip the spider emblem etched into his chest. "Not this material. This is just some spare spandex I found laying around in my attic." He releases his hold on the cloth so that it snaps back to being flushed against his abdomen in a skin-tight fit, when none of the ATM robbers give him the decency of chuckling. At the very least, the youngster winces behind his mask. They're a tough crowd apparently. "Yeah, I'm no comedian." He springs back into action when the brunette bandit rushes him. A swift spiral movement carries the spider-themed boy over his challenger, before he lands gracefully behind the criminal. Despite his short stature, it doesn't take much of a punch for him to knock the crook over. A strong shove takes out the thug, flung into the brick wall where the kid had been sticking in place. Hence this whole vigilantism gig. The young do-gooder gestures between his handiwork and himself as though to provide an emphasis of action to his statement. The Hawkman tears away the mouthpiece that had been covering the lower half of his face, unveiling a modified mandible. Bottom jaw unhinged to capacious proportions. A serpentine orifice full of fangs and a forked tongue sibilate a spray of verdant acid. The vigilante reacts with more common sense than anything, bounding out of the corrosive spit's projectile path. Hydrofluoric fluid splatters against the ATM, eating through the metal base with a steaming hiss. Ginger Guy growls, angry that he missed. His intended target lands safely atop a street post, crouched on all fours in a poised position akin to the form he'd used while upside down earlier. "But if you're willing to give me a chance instead of trying to kill me, I really think I might manage to get a good laugh out of you." The boy's voice cracks as he shouts at them to stop attacking, making him grateful for the mask that's pulled over his face, his blush of embarrassment hidden so that he can keep his dignity for a while longer. Two web lines tie the Mohawk member of the group to his blonde buddy, tangling them together. He ducks his head down and speaks in a lower tone of voice to avoid another spontaneous pubescent pitch adjustment. "Or I hope you'll give me one of those nose exhale things at the very least." Deku takes a swing next. Hefty hustle, easy to dodge and get under for the nimble vigilante. A fist slams into the thick hide of the giant's stomach, making the big burglar double over. "Oh, I've got one for you." The boy spectacularly hoists the burly bandit over his head as though the man weighs no less than a body pillow. How many criminals does it take to rob an ATM? Deku is given no time to answer. Instead, the colossal crook is chucked back towards his mother's pickup truck. Deku crushes the vehicle's cargo bed when he's forced to fit via crash landing. 4. The vigilante places his hands on his hips as he mentally counts the number of ATM robbers he just thwarted. One lens of his mask squints as the other expands, an expression of bewilderment clear through his mask. Apparently, the fact that the number was higher than one is pretty humiliating for them, come to think of it. He shakes his head, ridding himself of those distracting thoughts, as humorous as they might be. He still has a job to do. Even with the criminals defeated, he should round them all up to prevent them from trying to escape before the police arrive. It takes just as little an amount of effort for the marvelous youth to carry each criminal as it did to render them all unconscious. After gathering the group of goons and gossamer, the boy produces a notebook seemingly out of nowhere from his pocketless spider-themed spandex. Also, a pen, somehow where that had been tucked away is more mysterious than the journal. He flips through pages full of scribbles and sketches before landing on a blank sheet. Then, he gets to work. This part is just as much fun for him as it is to trip up the bad guys. What started as a fun interest or a hobby quickly became part of his hero work, or rather, vigilante work, circling his quarry more so than pacing, because he doesn't pace unless it's on the ceiling. The boy begins breaking down the tells of each opponent he faced. He'd be nibbling the end of his pen if not for the mask covering his mouth. Instead, he starts muttering as he performs his quirk analysis, another force of habit. The page that had been blank gradually gets filled. Starting with Deku's clear mutational type quirk, he writes down qualities that apply to the criminal such as super strength and increased mass. Deku's brunette buddy has a mutation as well, 2 elongated ears protruding from beneath the burglar's blue headband. That's a quirk that grants a heightened sense of hearing, just as blatantly obvious as the brute's giant genetics. The bronze blonde of the bunch is a little harder to analyze. No clear mutation to discern like his pals. Not until the vigilante sneaks a peek behind the crook's mask. A secret third eye was hidden away, albeit closed like the others. Cool, but nothing too shocking to see in a society where superpowers are passed off as a person's sense of quirkiness. Moving on to who's last but not least, the reckless youth leans in to inspect the Mohawk man's venom-tipped fangs. He can't help but draw a little doodle for this one. As for the ginger goon's quirk, he writes about the acidic spit he saw firsthand, adding an underlined note that it's very cool for extra emphasis. He nods, satisfied with the documentation of his fight and what he was able to take away from it. Not too shabby. Carefully so that the pages don't rip unevenly as he tears them out, the vigilante transfers his quirk analysis from the journal that he wrote into being stuck upon his webbing. It's a perfect gift wrapping, complete with a heartfelt message and all. Only one thing remains left for him to do. Of course, he can't scurry off without scribing his signature, etched at the bottom of the page in cursive kanji. He writes what can only be read as an autograph, courtesy of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. A portfolio of quirk analysis lies strewn across Detective Naomasa Tsukachi's desk, sat upon splintered softwooden stacks. Each page is written in descriptive detail. He can't help but admire every breakdown. As much as the other officers would hate to admit it, he himself has no problem thinking that it's nice to have a vigilante who does the paperwork for him for once. The heroes are usually no better than the vigilantes in that regard, even the #1 head honcho himself being guilty of leaping away when the bad guys are all punched out. Spider-Man, however, truly is quite courteous, new on the scene, but somehow efficiently elusive. Behind Tsukachi is a dented filing cabinet. It's full of past cases. A good margin pertains to previous vigilante activities. This one, however, is presenting itself a little differently than when the Crawler or Knuckleduster were operative. Spider-Man doesn't wait for heroes to arrive and assist him, nor does he brutalize anybody. It's no use dwelling on past experience or comparing unlicensed good doers. As close as he'll get going simply off presumption is that Spider-Man might share Crawler's knack for sticking to walls. He doubts the vigilante is a rare quirkless case. Light seeps in through the slits of his window shades as the sun sets outside, cascading his office in shadows. Tsukachi leans back, allowing the back of his cushioned chair to bend and give him a comfortable position. It's private moments like these that he's able to conduct his best investigative thinking. Many might assume a detective goes around tailing people in a tan overcoat like the one he has hung up across from him. And while that might occasionally be what he actually does, it's also a lot of this. Silence, thoughts, mulling over the facts to get to the truth of the investigation. So let's start with what he knows. Spider-Man isn't actually a man per se. If Tsukachi were a gambler, he'd dare to wager that the vigilante is a boy that's just begun puberty. While the quirk analysis is composed of a scholar's level of expertise, the handwriting has the sloppiness of a teenager more accustomed to typing on their phone or computer. Not to mention, the gang of ATM thieves that were busted had lied about Spider-Man being twice their size with a deep, intimidating voice. The group of petty crooks were embarrassed to have been bested by a kid and did a poor job of hiding that shame. Secondly, Spider-Man must be based somewhere within the Shizuoka prefecture. A majority of the vigilantes' movements revolve around the Musutafu area in particular, with sporadic stretches of criminal catches in that same region. It's a location home to many schools though, the top hero school in the nation a part of that long list, so it's not like this deduction does much to narrow down where the kid attends classes. Still, a couple more patrol cars and a few favors from heroes to also comb the streets wouldn't be a bad idea. It's not exactly a crime-ridden place to have been a point of interest before, so the detective really has to hand it to the vigilante yet again. Spider-Man wasn't kidding about the neighborhood part of his cheeky signature. Tsukachi brings a hand up to his chin, thumb pressing into the crook of his jaw and index finger placed upon his upper lip. He holds that pose as he muses other plausibilities. There's not many that get to cycle through his mind before his office door swings open. A dent is beginning to form from where the handle slams into the wall. Of course, out of all his co-workers who enter unannounced without the generosity of knocking first, he's not surprised to see Sansa Tamakawa is the one responsible this time. Not to mention all the other times. Hello every Nyan. Tamakawa's tabby mutation gives him a ginger cat's head, his miniature muzzle moving like an ordinary mouth. His whiskers wobble as he speaks in broken English. How are you? Fine, thank you. And Tsukachi can't help but slide his hand up from his chin to palm his face when he hears Tamakawa answering his own question. The off-duty cop ditched his uniform for a floral-printed shirt and shorts. To top it all off, Tamakawa is wearing Crocs and not sandals, mismatching the outfit. Oh my god. Tsukachi drags his internal groan-up from deep within his throat until it leaves his mouth externally. Please don't subject the rest of us to your shenanigans just because you're going on vacation to America for the summer. The detective reaches for one of his desk's drawers before remembering he's not an alcoholic and doesn't keep a liquor bottle or flask stored there. His hand hesitates before it settles for grabbing a mug full of lukewarm coffee, forgotten from this morning, but still guaranteed to hit the spot if the cup's printed kanji of "Don't bother me until I've had my caffeine" is true. This particular mug is actually a gift from Tamakawa, by the way. Not without laughing first. The cat-like cop steps deeper into Tsukachi's office, taking his co-worker's comment as an invitation to do so. You look like you could use a vacation of your own. Tamakawa smirks as much as his snout will allow. The officer's humored look meets the detective's withered stare. Then Tamakawa's eyes are drawn down to the papers littered across Tsukachi's desk. His whiskers wobble as his smile falters, but he asks anyways, "What you working on there?" Tsukachi lowers his mug from his lips long enough to grumble. "There ain't no rest for the weary so long as there ain't no rest for the wicked," before downing the last of its remains. Considering Spider-Man helped with the quirk analysis though, maybe wicked is a poor choice of words to describe the vigilante. Spider-Man is no knuckleduster and he's certainly not bloodthirsty like Stendhal. Still, this particular problem poses a challenge of its own. "There's some kid about to get into things way over his head," is the best summarization of the situation that he can muster. Tamakawa responds with what sounds like a cross between purring and humming. He paws at the papers atop the desk with his grubby mitts, inspecting them closer. Crocodile-like cat eyes dilate when they skim through what's written. "A kid wrote these." He sputters with disbelief as he glances between the quirk analysis and Tsukachi. It then crosses the officer's mind just what these breakdowns are derived from. A child through first-hand field experience wrote these. It's not like Tsukachi to pull pranks, but Tamakawa is ready for a punchline by this point. "We haven't dealt with a vigilante this young before." The detective agrees with his co-worker's skepticism to a certain extent, but still feels inclined to defend himself and his findings, although it shouldn't come too much as a shock that our new-gen children would do such in our quirked era where society idolizes heroes. He considers himself and the government lucky that this sort of thing didn't happen sooner actually. Unlicensed quirk defense occurs regularly every day. There are more cases where police get involved with illegal quirk usage than actual criminal activity. Tamakawa shakes his head, making a noise of disbelief that's just short of him choking on a hairball. Whatever happened to playing cops and robbers? His ears droop down when he thinks about the rules and regulations that basically made police a less than glorified cleanup crew for the real professionals. "I used to play heroes and villains while growing up too, but kids these days are really something else." It's not like Tamakawa could have made it into UA with a quirk that only gives him a tabby's attribute. But this Spider-Man fellow seems more than adept enough to apply for a hero course. Or rather, the Force could use an individual such as this if he'd like to be Spider Cop. Tsukachi can't help but share a similar sentiment. He ponders that part of the mystery a little bit. Spider-Man's motives may be a little more than simply living an amazing fantasy. He blinks back to being aware of Tamakawa idling at his desk, clearing his throat while regathering his thoughts. Eraserhead has a strange way with kids that I was thinking about getting him involved. The detective actually already left 3 texts and a voicemail telling the underground hero to get back to him, but he thinks better of himself to disclose that information. It'll do the department some good by keeping good relations with the heroes, at the very least. "Off man, not Eraserhead." Tamakawa strikes a dramatic pose in which one hand is placed over his heart while the other rests atop his furry forehead. A particular harrowing memory of when the underground hero tried to pet him makes the cop further slink down. "When he's not treating me like a kitten, the guy's a total stick in the mud." Tamakawa can already feel his fuzz bristling into a case of piloerection, and that's just from thinking about sharing the same room space as Eraserhead. There was a time when he found the brooding types cool and mysterious, but now he knows better. It's true what they say that you should never meet your heroes. Tsukachi struggles to keep a smirk from stretching across his face. As amusing as it is to imagine another instance in which he gets to see the cat-loving underground hero interact with his tabby-quirked partner, he has to force down that mischievous side of himself and focus on doing his job. He rolls his eyes at Tamakawa's antics before brushing them off. It should go without mentioning that Eraserhead was a huge help when it came to prior vigilante cases. This thing is sorta his area of expertise by now, considering how those cases turned out. That'd be putting the past lightly. The underground hero should be more than well equipped to aid in the investigation of Spider-Man. "You have fun with that." Tamakawa's voice is laced with sarcasm, but his body language tells a different story. Tsukachi doesn't need his lie-detecting quirk to know that he's convinced his co-worker that he's right about bringing the underground hero into the fold. Nevertheless, Tamakawa feigns a somber sigh while backing away from the detective's paper-patterned desk. "I'll be having real fun on some American beach across the ocean." He bids his friend farewell with a mock salute just as he ducks himself out of the room. The squeak of his Crocs pedaling him through the doorway follows suit. Tsukachi can't fight down that pesky smile anymore. Not that he has to worry about anybody seeing it now anyways. He waves goodbye despite Tamakawa not being there to witness the gesture. While the cat-like cop may be out of view, he isn't completely out of earshot quite yet. The detective raises his voice ever so slightly to call after the officer. "Just don't treat the sand there like kitty litter." Muffled, but only a little because of how thin the precinct's walls are, Tamakawa shouts back, "I resent that." His whine carries over from however far he got with every receding squeak of his Crocs. Thanks to Tsukachi's quirk, he knows that his friend doesn't truly mean that. But again, he didn't really need his power to confirm it. He could hear the smile in Tamikawa's tone. It's probably just as broad as his own. Gloved fingers curl under a windowsill, carefully raising it up so that it slides open without so much as a squeak. When the lower sash is lifted halfway, through the narrow aperture crawls a boy adorned in red and blue spandex. He stealthily creeps atop the ceiling of an unlit bedroom, moving along on all fours from an inverted angle. When the boy is far enough away from the opening in which he entered, he extends his leg to nudge the window down in order for it to close behind him. It slides shut as quietly as it was raised. A quick left and right glance to ensure nobody saw him comes much too late. But he's able to breathe a sigh of relief since it didn't cost him getting caught. He slowly turns himself to be upright, still clinging to the ceiling of the room with one hand. Once his feet are lowered close enough to nearly be touching the bed below him, he allows his fingers to stop sticking to the roof. The sneaky spider-themed vigilante lands on the All Might blanketed mattress, springs creaking ever so slightly. The lenses of his mask squeeze into narrow slithers as he winces, body tensing under the stress of his nerves. He pauses, staying as still as humanly physically possible. After waiting for a moment, holding his breath and listening closely in case he hears anyone else's, he trusts his senses that he can proceed with stepping down from the bed. Spider-Man grabs the back of his mask, giving it a good tug so that it slips off of his face. The freckled features of 14-year-old Izuku Midoriya are exposed to the air-conditioned environment. The boy's mop of fluffy hair puffs out upon being freed of its confinement, green curls twisting up and down at odd angles as an unruly mess. His toned torso stretches as he stands a little straighter. He comes to his full height, but it's still rather short for his age. He really is only a kid, circular eyes stretched wide as watery and innocent as they can be. His irises as green as his hair gaze out at all of his bedroom's hero memorabilia. Decorating all four corners of his room are posters of the #1 hero, a clock and a door sign sharing the same design. Even the color scheme of the paint on the walls match All Might's costume. He looks down at his own suit, the red and blue pattern inspired by the symbol of peace's outfit. Iterations of All Might's wardrobe are on display across mounted shelves via collectible action figurines and miniature models. Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, you name the version and he has a variant so long as it exists. He has no need for an altar to perform any hero worship to his idol, considering the entire bedroom itself may as well be a shrine dedicated to the symbol of peace. Each corner of Izuku's mouth turns upwards as he looks from poster to statue. All of them share All Might's signature smile that he can't help mimicking, a similar toothy grin. Sure, it's not an expression he can show with a mask on, but that doesn't mean it doesn't still hold a powerful purpose. All Might keeps a rictus grin plastered on his face 24/7 to assure civilians he has everything under control. He always puts them at ease, a quality Izuku admires and always wanted to share as his own hero by saving people with a smile too. Well, with a secret identity to keep, he wound up having to find an alternative route. All Might's sidekick, though always having a constant sourpuss expression by contrast to his partner, made up for his part by cracking jokes. Izuku decided to borrow Sir Night Eye's quality and try cracking quips as Spider-Man. Considering the reception he got from those ATM robbers, his material could probably still use a little work. He shrugs it off, thinking he can make up for it by getting a notebook to jot jokes in like he does with his hero analysis. It's harder than he thought to come up with stuff on the fly. It's not like the quips can't write themselves in particular situations. And talking does sometimes come easy when he's scared or anxious. But there's a difference between cringe humor and what he hopes will alleviate panic in anyone that he's saving. There's still a lot to this hero jig that he needs to figure out. Or, well, vigilante hobby is more like it. But those details aren't important. That's what he tells himself anyways. Izuku removes his web shooters, metal armbands light enough to tuck under his bed where he can web them away for safekeeping. It sure would be more convenient if his webbing were organic when it comes to this part of the whole secret identity thing. It'd also be a whole heck of a lot cheaper too. He's been running low on allowance when it comes to the ingredients to make more of his web fluid formula, but he can't bring himself to ask for more money. Not to mention, he's having a hard time coming up with excuses and lies to maintain this secret, so bringing up his allowance is only bound to do him more harm than good when it comes to that. He sighs, checking the drawers of his desk to see what remains of his supply. A couple of cartridges wait on standby. It's enough for him to make do with for another week. Now for the spectacular Spider-Man's next big decision. He must contemplate whether he'll swap his current onesie for a pair of pajamas. The spandex may as well be a pair of lightweight long johns already. Then again, he has to keep it hidden from his mom, so, yeah, the whole secret identity thing. Izuku keeps his suit on but pulls a pair of sweatpants to his waist and then grabs an oversized long-sleeve shirt to wear over it. Sometimes compromises must be made and he figures this makes for a good middle ground. Look, he has no problem convincing himself that it makes for a time saver whenever he needs to do quick transitions between his alter ego. This isn't lazy. It's actually assiduous if anything. The boy stops, nostrils flaring as he suddenly catches a whiff of pork and eggs. That aforementioned toothy grin of his not only returns but grows tenfold. After all, he can't be expected to be energized without some proper nourishment. A self-proclaimed superhero has gotta eat, and he's been operating on an empty stomach all day. Izuku finishes hiding his vigilante gear before eagerly heading downstairs for his mother's catsuit. The wooden handlebar mounted above each step makes for a nifty little railing system to slide down in order to get there faster. Spider abilities or not, that's always been a fun way to reach the living room, though he is forced to walk the rest of the way to the kitchen from there. He does a little waltz from carpet to tile, finding the source of dinner's alluring aroma. Inko Midoriya stirs rice in a frying pan above her oven top, simultaneously seasoning a tray of pork. She's humming to what sounds like the tune of the Itsy Bitsy Spider, but Izuku doesn't have the ear for recognizing songs to know for sure. He brushes it off as his imagination, since that'd be way too much of a coincidence for his liking. When he gets close enough to wrap his arms around the chubby woman, he pulls her into a hug from behind. "Hey Mom." His sudden greeting is unexpected enough to warrant a small jump though. Inko places a hand over her heart, startled. However, that surprise passes and she quickly recovers. She begins matching her son's energy with equal elation to see him, returning Izuku's warm embrace. "Oh, Izuku, I didn't hear you come in." Her hair, green genetics passed down to her son, is pulled up and tied into a bun until she undoes the bobby pin and lets it fall free. Next comes her pink apron, the woman tossing it so that it lands atop a cabinet. She turns the oven off, finished cooking. Izuku doesn't have to be told or asked anything. He starts grabbing silverware to set the table for supper. Besides, he figures he owes his mother that much. Sorry for not giving you a heads up, and his apology is sincere even if he doesn't bow. A couple of cups with some plates are set out as he mulls over what to say. But there is a considerable amount of overlap for him to pause when contemplating an excuse for his vigilante activity. Outwriting some quirk analysis, well, that's technically not a lie. A soft smile etches its way across Inko's lips. That reason for tardiness sounds like her son well enough. It's an excuse befitting of the one that she raised and watched grow into a teenager. I figured as much. Her tender tone holds no anger but rather complete acceptance and understanding. The little boy she knows lived a sheltered lifestyle. He was a quirkless kid in a quirk-filled society, so he took up analyzing the powers he himself didn't have and so very much admired. For all she knows, he stayed exactly the same. Just be sure to text me next time. Her only caveat, if that's to remain the case, is that he doesn't make her worry any more than she already does. If she only knew the truth, that he's got a quirk of his own now, she'd be worried sick. Izuku returns her smile, albeit his is a tad strained. He can't let her know. He knows she wouldn't be able to handle the stress. You've got it, so he lies instead. It's the only way to put her at ease. After what happened, Izuku refuses to put her through any more emotional turmoil. His eyes water as he recalls a particularly harrowing memory. That was tough on them both. The boy blinks his brimming tears away to get his eyes out of their glossy state before his mom can notice. If he starts crying, then he knows he'll never hear the end of it, and that'd be just as bad as her finding out that he's Spider-Man. So, do you want to tell me about some of the quirks you saw? Any interesting ones? It's fortunately not so hard to postpone his angst and brooding when his mom has a knack for cheering him up. Inko serves her famous katsudon dish while letting her son launch into a quirk otaku rambling. It's times like these that Izuku doesn't think things can get any better. Heck yeah. The boy shovels a spoonful of rice to munch on. Some bits fly out of his mouth as he chews and talks with it open. There was one that could spit acid, a demonstration of his own version mimicked with whatever food he doesn't swallow. And another that made the guy hooge. His next visualization is spreading his hands out wide to convey a semblance of wit. It's all in good fun, nerding out completely with an overstimulated sense of excitement. But it can sometimes be a bit much even for Inko. She delicately disrupts his spiel with a slow raising hand. Izuku's words trail off when he notices the movement, his eyes following the gesture as she then points to his napkin. Izuku, sweetie, don't forget your manners. It's not so much a reprimanding as it is a reminder. Even so, the boy bashfully shrinks in on himself as he blushes from embarrassment. He dabs at the sauce smeared across his mouth and collects the crumbs that got on the table. Sorry, Mom. He realizes he got a little carried away. Time to rein it in a bit. They all had some type of mutation, like there was another guy with super tall ears or a dude with a third eye, so it was kinda hard not to notice what their quirks were. Oh, did I mention that the acid-spitting guy had fangs like a snake? He had a forked tongue and everything. Now that I think about it, I should have looked to see if he had scales on his skin or not. I mean, the big guy had blubber with his mutation, so it's not that theoretically impossible, which can only mean I might have not noticed something about those other two either. Oh no, WhatIf missed an important detail in me. Quirk analysis that would have been crucial to understanding their abilities and nomimi abilities. Oh, whoops, that wasn't reining it in at all. As a matter of fact, he would have probably kept going if he didn't have to stop in order to breathe. Inko laughs at her son's antics, a small shake of her head not so much due to disbelief but because of how uncanny those ramblings always are. Oh my. She picks at her plate of katsudon before stabbing a piece of pork and putting it in her mouth. That sure sounds exciting, dear. I'm just glad that you had a good time. The food is as sweet as her son's smile, and it's times like these that Inko doesn't think things can get any better. Izuku feeds himself a hearty portion of eggs, making sure to chew it completely and swallow, before shifting the conversation in a slightly different direction. How was your day? He doesn't just ask her to be polite but does so with genuine sincerity and curiosity. Inko occasionally has interesting stories from work to share, some involving cool quirks customers have. He has a sip of water, listening intently just in case there's something he doesn't want to miss. Inko falters, nearly choking on her food. Izuku stops when he sees this, but pretends not to notice. He instead follows her gaze that's casting itself to the side now to discover the source of her disgruntled behavior. It's his turn to swallow hard on katsudon when he discovers a stack of overdue bills hidden atop the fridge. It's no wonder that she's hiding them from him. He guesses that she shares the same sentiment he has as Spider-Man with not wanting her to worry, but it still comes as a harsh reality check. It's been hard on her ever since she was widowed, in more ways than one. Paying everything alone in this economy is next to impossible. Inko clears her throat, readjusting her smile to remain intact. It was just your run-of-the-mill kind of day. She shrugs nonchalantly in an attempt to disregard the question as a topic altogether. Izuku opens his mouth to push the matter further but closes it just as promptly, thinking better of himself. If she wants to keep the bills to herself, then he'll leave it alone for now, Izuku figures, or can only hope that she'll tell him on her own eventually. The boy gathers another mouthful of katsudon on his plate as he mulls things over in his head. I've been thinking about getting a summer job. It's not like he can't make subliminal suggestions to help out though. Okay, that may not have been the most subtle approach, but I need to start thinking about what my future career will be, and it's probably a good idea to build my resume. He smooths out the rough edges of his proposal while also spreading sauce on his pork. It's not the worst idea, right? Though shocked by the suddenness of this suggestion, I think that's a wonderful idea. Inko is as supportive as ever with her son's decision. She wouldn't ever say it aloud, but it's a relief to hear he's beginning to think realistically about getting a job. Izuku has always wanted to be a hero from toddler to tween, but the odds of that happening plummeted when he was diagnosed as quirkless. She's not aware of his vigilante activities or his newfound abilities that help him do them. But even if she were, this is the safest course of action for her son that she would like for him to take. Any particular places you would like to look at? She asks for more details in order to encourage him further on this promising path. Ooh, he hadn't really thought that far ahead since this whole thing was a spur-of-the-moment conceptualization, but he can't let his mom know that, so he goes with the first thing that pops into his head: pizza. There's a coupon magnetized to the fridge right under the bills up top that his eyes land on, helping him come to a rational conclusion. I'll be a pizza delivery boy, because that's the type of heroic service that this world needs, and only someone with spider powers can do it. Izuku inwardly groans but accepts that there's no going back now that he's already suggested the job. Though, Inko sounds just about as thrilled but runs with it anyways. We all start somewhere. Why not? Just once. Izuku would like for her to go without the overly supportive parenting. It's not like he could make it as a scientist somewhere just yet, but he also hadn't really considered turning Spider-Man into a mascot for pizza. He can already hear the new slogan in his head now: nobody out-pizzas the spider. Okay, it's a work in progress, but you get the idea. Then again, his mom needs financial support. And if that means slinging pizzas instead of swinging crooks, then so be it. Izuku's silverware nearly falls out of his hands when his phone suddenly vibrates against his leg. While what he's dubbed as spider sense warns against incoming danger, it sadly doesn't prevent him from being scared or surprised by other things. He plucks the cellular device from his pocket to see what all the buzz is about. Thanks to the Midoriya household's monthly subscription to the Hero Feed app, Izuku is always notified when there's some sort of hero-related activity going on, or, alternatively, villain activity. Crime alerts are to let civilians know which places to avoid. But for a certain wall-crawling vigilante, those can sometimes be places of interest. Izuku. Inko's voice startles the boy so much that he comes closer to dropping his phone more than he did his silverware. Darn spider sense. It's never useful when he most needs it, especially since his mother is fixing him with a look that may as well be a death glare. Seriously, Izuku could have sworn this was some sort of danger sense meant to alert him when his life is at risk. No cell phones at the dinner table, and code gestures with the prongs on her fork for him to put it away before stabbing a piece of pork to emphasize her point. Manners. Remember, sorry. Izuku agrees to stop scrolling through Hero Feed with little to no argument. Not without taking a quick glance at the latest news report though. The top story pertains to some criminal that's been posting their crimes as YouTube videos, mostly misdemeanors and pranks bordering the line of the law. Nevertheless, a villain garnering an audience that supports these types of activities so long as they remain unpunished is proving to be a problem for hero society. If Izuku wanted to attract attention, he wouldn't have worn a mask, but maybe this is something Spider-Man can help with. In the meantime, he puts his phone away like he was told and enjoys some quality time having dinner with his mom. A collection of lights, all of them in the shape of four-sided boxes, bleed a blue hue into an otherwise Vanta-black environment. Their computer monitors, Hero Feed, YouTube, blogs, anything and everything of interest to the woman viewing them is distributed to individually designated screens. All of social media is at her fingertips as she uses one hand to tap at a single keyboard and the other to hold a cup of tea to her lips. Within the dimness of the dark, she stews and she schemes. She is Manami Aba, and she is the internet personality known as the dastardly delicious Screwball. The namesake wasn't decided out of her own will, but rather it was an alias given to her from the authorities and internet trolls, though it has admittedly somehow become fitting for her on-screen character after a while. She even went as far as to design her costume to further sell the gimmick. Her vibrant vermilion hair is always made into pigtails, as flashy and bright as her stark white costume with patterns of pink mixed in. It's all to grow her audience in pursuit of a single goal, in order to turn her dream into reality. She figures if she can make a big enough name for herself, then she'll be able to gain the attention of the criminal vlogger that inspired her to begin with and maybe even perform a collab together. A monitor separate from all of the others displays Gentle Criminal and his own villainous videos. He's her idol and he makes her swoon. Switching her sights to a screen that shows the view count on her latest post makes her sigh. The number is fine but it needs to be higher. Making Best Jeanist split his pants and covering Fat Gum in double bubble prove to be funny but they just aren't good enough of pranks to sell her brand. Gentle Criminal actually pulls heists and brings an extravagant elegance to his videos. Manami is missing that and she knows it. She needs to come up with something big for Screwball to screw up. She needs to orchestrate a huge event to guarantee her publicity. Even better, Manami decides that whatever she ends up doing, it will have to be done live. The self-proclaimed fame will be a hell of a lot easier if she ups the ante. A couple of searches on the dark web to hide her cyber trail and another tea packet later, she starts putting together something a little more concrete. The woman has a knack for hacking, but that's not all that will come in handy for this villainous scheme. She also has a brain inside that head of hers. Contrary to her namesake as an internet star, she has a brain smart enough to hardwire and engineer all sorts of other fancy technological gadgets. Some camera-mounted drones ought to do her live stream some good, as well as fireworks for an explosive finale. Manami giggles to herself, delighted that a plan is finally starting to formulate. Working out the details and applying finishing touches can wait though. She's uploaded her video, but now Gentle Criminal is about to upload his. The redhead has already gone through 2 cups of tea, but she makes room for a third. There's also no watching YouTube without a snack either. Everything must be perfect. She munches on caramelized almonds, taking care not to chew on them too loudly so that the crunches don't overlap with Gentle Criminal's voice. She wonders if her fellow villain vlogger's lips taste as good as her treat. The thought alone makes the woman's cheeks burn brighter red as her pigtails. Soon, she will show him and the world just how great they can be together. Frayed sneakers scuff a series of steps, retracing footprints down the Midoriya residence's small parent. Izuku hops the last stoop of the staircase just as he's about to reach the bottom, shoes smacking the cement path beyond. The all-reliable reds are so worn and old that they may as well be tossed out with the trash bag that the boy is carrying with him. But he can't bring himself to part ways with his shoes for sentimental sake. It's not like he needs fancy slippers or anything of that sort to take out the garbage anyways. Well, he does wear them routinely and recreationally, but that's beside the point. If they've carried him this far and they can keep taking him further, then they may as well stick around. Pun unintended. Kinda. The soles seeping out do allow his spider-like ability to cling to surfaces a little more leeway with these particular sneakers. Izuku catches the front of his foot on a cracked part of the cement path, nearly tripping. That's completely unrelated to his shoes being old though. They're still completely reliable. Only if you ask him and not his mother, but that's just because he forgot to pay attention to where he was walking, which is to the neighborhood dumpster. Right, no running off to do some Spider-Manning because he can hear sirens in the distance. Izuku pauses, staring off in the direction in which he can see the red and blue lights of a police cruiser. He watches and waits. Spider sense is an attribute to his quirk that may not help with moms, but in the case of criminals, that's a little different. Except, the cop car is only pulling somebody over for speeding. It's a false alarm. Izuku releases a breath that he didn't realize he was holding. Spider-Man isn't needed for writing up tickets. Not yet, at least. Continuing on his merry way, the off-duty vigilante can't help but smile at the notion, imagining a peaked cap and aviator sunglasses added to his mask, maybe even a mustache. It's enough to make him consider such a career path. It would beat being a pizza delivery boy. Maybe that won't be so bad either though. It's hard to really know anymore. Izuku just wants to enjoy his stroll through the neighborhood. He does enough overthinking while web swinging. He doesn't need to do it while getting his steps in too. The rest of the way is a short walk, so Izuku allows himself that much time to let his mind go blank for a bit. For the remainder of the trip, it's solely silence in that head of his, until he recalls a song's beat but not its lyrics, making him brainstorm like crazy in an effort to remember them. Izuku shakes his head, reorganizing his thoughts. He's made it to the dumpster now. A little spider strength to throw his trash bag over ought to do the trick. His old quirkless scrawny self couldn't throw a ball through a hoop to save his life, but now this sort of thing comes easy. Strangely, seconds later, a second garbage bag joins his. It's a little more than simple deja vu though. He pivots on his heel, spinning himself around to see somebody else disposing of their junk. Not just anyone though. A girl. A pretty girl. Izuku's spider sense took the day off apparently. This is the sort of stuff that he'd like to get a warning for. Her hair is as radiant an orange color as the sunset behind her, a natural glow of the lowering light highlighting the way it's done into a ponytail. Then there's her face and how it's illuminated in a way that brings out the teal tone of her eyes. Izuku snaps out of his dazed demeanor, realizing that she's been saying something to him this whole time. It's nice to see people around here still throw their stuff out where it's supposed to go instead of just on the beach. She shows him a perfect set of teeth with a bright smile that's possibly more blinding than the sun. Izuku refrains from smacking his cheeks to get himself together. He focuses on what she's saying and not her looks. Oh, she's wearing a pair of work gloves. He really needs to focus better. But it's thanks to those gloves that it finally clicks in his head what she was talking about and where they're at. Why you're talking about Takoba. Izuku can't help but stutter when talking to a pretty girl his age. He tries thinking about the beach that they're referring to in order to distract himself from her beauty. He was going to think about her beauty. It helps a little. The sandy spot became a junkyard after years of dumping and pollution. Nobody dares swim there anymore. It's a shame what happened to it. He vaguely remembers a time when he'd build sandcastles there as a kid. Summer would have been a great time to go there too. Yeah, the girl agrees wholeheartedly if her distant gaze and somber smile are anything to go by. She pulls her work gloves off, tucking them into the back of her pants waistline. When she holds out one of her hands, it takes a second for Izuku to understand that she's performing an American gesture of greeting. I'm Itsuka Kendo. She introduces herself when he accepts the handshake. I've actually been working on trying to clean the place up a bit, and he can't help but admire her more when he feels calluses instead of smooth skin as a result of that tough labor. Izuku Midoriya. He shares his own name before allowing himself to gush a little. Wow, you've been clearing that junk out all by yourself. That's incredible. He calls himself the friendly neighborhood wallcrawler, but he hadn't even considered doing community service until now. Spider-Man collecting recyclables and sweeping sidewalks isn't as silly as delivering pizza. It's not a bad idea. Even All Might occasionally stops to help seniors across streets sometimes. It's no big deal. Itsuka proves herself to be humble about it all when she waves Izuku's praise aside. It's like each second spent with this girl only raises the boy's admiration for her, especially when it comes to what she says next. It's part of my training to get into UA. Itsuka may as well have dropped a bomb on Izuku's head the way that his mind is blown. She says it so casually, but that particular tidbit of information means the world to him. You're trying for UA. Izuku can't contain a shout of sheer shock. There may not be any in the sky just yet, but there are stars twinkling in his eyes. You must have an amazing quirk if you think you can get in. A notebook has already spawned out of thin air and landed in his hands like the Death Note when he begins mulling over the possibilities of what Itsuka's quirk can be. Well, Itsuka gets the hint and obliges by inflating each of her hands. Supersizing my fists can make them pack a better punch. Izuku's own hands move at a pace that might make someone believe his quirk is super speed. He's already filled 3 pages with theories and analysis. Itsuka waits for him to finish writing before adding as an afterthought. My strength is also enhanced when I make them grow, though that's a skill I only recently discovered while cleaning up Takoba. That's so cool. Izuku beams with an unprecedented amount of joy that Itsuka is somewhat taken back. There's no doubt in my mind that you'll be able to get in, and his awe just keeps bursting forth. If she's not careful, the girl can get radiation poisoning from how much brightness the boy is emitting. A light blush appears on her cheeks when she sees the way that he's looking at her. Thanks. Itsuka feigns a cough into one of her enlarged fists to clear her blush more than her throat. Then her hands return to their ordinary size so that they can rest on her hips. I'll be honest, I don't really know what I'd do if I didn't. The redhead's gaze moves to her feet when she considers the possibility of not meeting the expectations that have been placed upon her. Yeah, Izuku can't help but relate when recalling his own dream to attend UAS hero program. I can understand that he finds himself staring down at his feet too. The aged set of shoes he chose to wear stare back. But, hey, you should be already thinking about your hero name if that's the case. He offers Itsuka an encouraging smile when lifting his head back up. She returns the expression, fair point, successfully cheered up. I actually already decided though. Itsuka flexes one of her hands before fully clenching it. I was gonna go with Battle Fist, but after her lapse in speech lasts a second too long before she readjusts her sentence. I changed my mind to go with Mighty Jab now. Mighty. Izuku lingers on the girl's hero name more than the pause that came before it. If he were a clockwork machine, the gears would be spinning. Is that inspired by All Might? He's back to being overly excited again, but he can't help himself when it comes to the number one hero. No, Itsuka answers a little too hastily. She backpedals. I mean, maybe. Yes, wincing with each change to her response. She had been way too forceful to start, but now she's not nearly resolute enough. The girl wants nothing more than to bury her face in her hands at this very moment. But Izuku doesn't notice her consternation in the slightest, still stuck on the symbol of peace being her inspiration. That's awesome. I love All Might too. Well, everybody loves All Might, but I'm super inspired by him in the same way that I thought about calling myself Small Might as a sidekick or Mighty Man when I'm older. He cuts himself off when he realizes he's rambling and that Itsuka is staring at him with eyes as wide as saucers. Sorry. No, it's okay. I just didn't expect to meet an All Might superfan. She laughs it off much to Izuku's relief. She's rather relieved herself, a drop of sweat sliding down the side of her head before she flicks it away. I wonder how he'd react. She speaks as though she knows the man personally but hides it well, considering the judgment Izuku received from his childhood friend turned bully and his other peers. There's already an assumption in his mind of how his idol would react. He'd probably be creeped out. The rational conclusion is pretty obvious when he thinks about how his bedroom could be turned into an All Might museum. Otaku is a term that comes to mind, but that'd be putting it lightly. I wouldn't say that. But Itsuka quells his inner turmoil by saying otherwise. Hey, if a pretty girl says something, then it must be true. Izuku feels his cheeks heating up. They only burn brighter when she tacks on. It's kinda cute, turning the boy's face from ruby to rose in terms of red. He can't believe that he's actually been holding a full conversation with her once he's reminded that they're the opposite sex. See cute. His brain short-circuits as though it's run by wired electricity. He's back to stuttering again. He can't formulate a coherent sentence anymore. Izuku can feel his hands getting sweaty. He pats them on his pants legs in an effort to dry them. Well, it was nice meeting you, Midoriya, but I gotta get going. Hope to see you around. He's spared by some miracle that she's ready to end their conversation now that he's lost his ability to speak. Itsuka waves as she starts to part ways with him, realizing that he's just standing there like a fool without returning the gesture or saying anything back. He forces himself to blurt something out. Why you too? He's still stuttering, but it's better than nothing. No, he can do even better. He steels himself, trying for a better farewell. Good luck on the UA entrance exam, MJ. Itsuka stops short, glancing back at him with a perturbed look on her face. MJ. She raises her eyebrows inquisitively. Oh, it's short. F for Mighty Jab. Izuku cringes when he says it aloud. He'll have to leave the nicknames to his bully, even if the kanji in Izuku being read as Deku to mean useless is rather mean. He has to admit that it's way more clever than how he came up with MJ. He bows in order to apologize. Sorry, I just thought. I like it. But Itsuka gives the nickname a huge thumbs up. Izuku slowly stands up straight, stupefied. Her smile flares with the sunset. A boy can easily get mesmerized by a girl as gorgeous as she is. Bye. But he doesn't get to stare for much longer since she's trotting over the hill to leave now. Bye. Izuku is left breathless as he exhales. He really does hope that he'll get to see her again. Then again, it's much more likely with his typical luck that he'll be seeing Screwball as Spider-Man first. Clouds of condensation waft from a loose manhole cover, sewer steam lacing the air with an odor that makes Izuku's nose tingle more than his spider sense ever did. Damp cardboard that's matted to the ground in patches where puddles aren't already occupying space paves a path forward. It's not the most charming welcome rug, but it is probably the cheapest. A metal door plastered with newspaper is just as moist from the precipitation of the alley. Layers sheeting the surface the way a child's drawings would be clipped to a refrigerator, except there's no magnets to hold these soggy pages in place. Moldy brick on either side of the boy presents an unlit bar sign shaped to fit the kanji in a bottle. Izuku digs a hand into his back pants pocket to produce the paper slip that his recent employer gave him. The address written down appears to match the location. He shrugs before stepping up to the metallic entrance and rapping his knuckles on the door to knock. While he waits for somebody to answer, he hoists the stack of pizza boxes that he's carrying a little higher to rest upon his shoulder, hoping to keep them suspended away from the less than sanitary environment. It also helps to smell Parmesan cheese and pepperoni instead of whatever rank filth coats the pavement. Seriously, his shoe outsoles are starting to stick to the ground, and that's without spider abilities. Finally, the metal door's lock unlatches with a click and creaks open a crack for someone to peer through. Their voice is raspy, but Izuku deciphers the question well enough. What is it? Izuku offers the best smile he can muster under these circumstances as he presents the person's order. Pizza time. His tone of voice is much more chipper by comparison. A combination of the two, however, manages to convince the customer to open the door a little further. Izuku can see now that it's a guy whose face could use some moisturizing, which is ironic considering the dampness of the alley, though he doubts splashing some dirty puddle water would do anything to help. Then again, Krusty McGee here does look to be a special case. Hang on, the man's throat must be as dry as his skin since his voice somehow sounds raspier when he shouts over his shoulder, "Kirigiri, did you order a pizza?" Uneven waves of blue hair are paling as much as the guy's face. He's either never seen a day of summer sunlight in his life or he really needs the nourishment from the pies Izuku brought to deliver. Red eyes flick back and bore into the boy's contrasting green gaze, prompting Izuku to quickly divert his stare. Considering what some quirks are capable of, the teen worries that he might have insulted the customer, since mind reading isn't too far-fetched of a possibility. "Yes, Tamura, I thought it best to order takeout tonight." A much smoother tone of voice that likely belongs to Kirigiri can be heard from somewhere within the bar. Tamura gives Izuku a skeptical look despite receiving confirmation that the pizza is being delivered to the right place. In all honesty, Izuku is still wondering whether this is the correct customer. Allow the delivery boy to enter. The longer you leave the door open, the more moths there are that get in. A few bugs flutter from the broken bar sign to the narrow gap of the entrance as though on cue, and that seems to be enough to convince Tamura more than anything else. TCH, Tamura steps aside. The door's hinges squeak as it swings fully open. Surprisingly, the interior of the bar is much more refined than the establishment's exterior. Izuku gets an eyeful of decorational design and decor. When his shoes step on blackened ebony floorboards instead of blackened asphalt, zero stick or puddles and not even so much as a creak from the wood, he has half a mind to leave his sneakers at the door. "You answer the door next time then," Tamura grumbles and groans as he saunters to one of many seats lining a bar counter. Bottles brim the wall beyond the serving station, lining shelves until they reach the ceiling where a fan is set to a lazy and slow spin. "It's the least you do to pitch in around here." Kirigiri doesn't even try to hide the snark in his retort when he disregards Tamura's complaint. It almost makes Izuku laugh. Almost. He's too awestruck by the man's quirk to admire any quippage. Clearly the bartender, if his elegant suit and tie assembly of attire is anything to go by. Kirigiri is made up of a purple smog coating his entire body's form. That smoky overlay conceals the man's face, leaving only two glowing slithers of yellow to emote for him. Izuku would have whipped out his quirk analysis notebook by now if it didn't mean dropping the stack of pizza boxes he's been holding. Remembering that he has a job to do, Izuku stops gawking at the bartender's quirk and places the man's order atop the serving station. He then retrieves the customer's receipt from the same back pants pocket where he stuffed his address slip. The boy reads off the amount due. "That'll be 4,000 yen. His earlier smile returns as he holds out the bill. It's what he supposes can be considered a customer service smile. It's not really had the best of luck with results thus far, but maybe that'll change with experience. God, he can only pray and hope so. "Pass it over and give me a slice already." Tamura grabs the top box for himself before it can even be paid for. He licks his chapped lips, tongue running over scarring. "I'm starving." The guy is practically salivating as he flips open the box's lid to get at the pie within. When he sees what's inside, though, his composure immediately changes to one less than thrilled by the prospect of devouring a pizza. "What the?" His face scrunches into a world record-breaking number of creases and wrinkles. Izuku glances over to see what the fuss is all about, his face doing the opposite as it drops. Melted mozzarella clings to the box's top, whereas tomato sauce paints the rest of the cardboard container like a Picasso painting. Dough lays mashed in the middle, looking more like a misshaped potato than a circular pizza. Izuku tries to blink in order to break his mesmerized gaze, but the sight is just too baffling to look away from. He had thought it was a good idea to web swing across town, thinking that he could deliver orders faster that way, but apparently the ride is way too bumpy of a trip for pizza cargo. All those flips he did are going to make his boss flip if these customers don't first, since Tamura's red-eyed glare is making the guy appear ready to kill him at any given moment. Izuku's spider sense even triggering a mild warning. It's an easy guess as to who is gonna flip out first. Fortunately, Kirigiri is the much more sensible member of the duo, and he intervenes before things can escalate to a level of violence. I believe it would be in your business best interest to let us have this one on the house. Talking things out, even if all Izuku does is rapidly nod in agreement, winds up being a much better alternative. And as dissatisfied patrons of your delivery service, we will also be excluding any sort of tip, though that may as well be a verbal kick to the butt for him to run out the door. The metal entrance slams shut behind him on his way out, latch locking with a sharp snap. Izuku starts to sigh but finishes with a disgruntled groan. That was a total bust. Not only is he coming back short-handed on the balance due, but he's not even got a personal tip to stash. The boy runs a hand through his hair, fingers coursing over green curls. He won't be surprised if he gets fired for this. First day on the job and he's already messed it up. Now might be a good time to start considering alternative occupational trades. Izuku forces down a scoff. He wishes it were as simple as something smacking him right in the face, but the chances of that happening are slim. First peeling off the bar's metallic door, and then secondly blowing through the air with a gust of wind, a wet newspaper slaps against Izuku's face. The boy sputters and spits as he pries the damp paper away, cursing his spider sense for the zillionth time for not warning him, while hoping it'll at least let him know if he catches a disease now. When he stops and sees what's printed on the front page, though, he's not so concerned about his health anymore. All that praying paid off. He's found his solution to his job and money problems. An ad posted by Juko News flying right into his head is all it took. 70,000 yen reward for photos of Spider-Man. Izuku tugs at the heel of his left sneaker, using his thumb to pry it off, as he hops up and down to maintain balance with his other foot. A brief alternation to switch sides in order to do the same process with his other sneaker nearly causes him to trip. Nevertheless, once they're both removed, he sets each of his shoes down at the welcome mat of his home. "Mom, I'm back," he shouts just loud enough to be heard. He figures he'll do his mother the courtesy of announcing his return this time rather than giving her another fright. "I'm in here." He hears his mother raising her voice from the living room before heading that way. The boy can't help but smile fondly, knowing that she's been there waiting for him to come home. Izuku finds her sitting on the couch while she knits a blue sweater that's still missing its sleeves. The television is on, playing some sort of game show, but the audio is muted. "You're done with work so soon." Inko sets her crochet hooks aside and puts her project on pause in order to address her son as soon as he enters the room. Izuku feigns a laugh, but only manages a forced chuckle. The boy bashfully rubs the nape of his neck, hand running up to the back of his head where he can nervously scratch his itchy mess of a bush that he calls hair. "Funny you should ask that." His voice wanders off with his eyes when Inko fixes her son with a stare, clearing his throat to cease his act of amusement. He tries to salvage the situation by getting straight to the point and asks, "Do you know where we put Dad's DSLR from America?" Inko blinks back her initial shock, having not expected that from Izuku. Any other parent would probably sit their child down and interrogate them in this type of scenario. Her son came home early from his new job, acting stranger than usual, and now he's asking about his late father's camera. This parent, however, knows her kid to be the most sweetest, sincere, and honest person in the world, so she lets her questions wait for later and answers her boys instead. "That old thing. It should be up in the attic with the rest of our storage." A look of relief washes over Izuku's face. He's already turning on his heel, an arm thrusting a thumb over his shoulder. "Is it okay if I go dig it up?" But the boy knows better than to bolt from the room without first getting permission. Inko nods, granting him the seal of approval. That's more than enough for Izuku that he doesn't wait for her to confirm it with words. "I don't see why not." "Thanks, Mom. I'll explain later." Inko watches her son scamper off as he promises to make sense of his absurdity some other time. The woman sits still, a baffled expression on her face for way too long, before she rolls her eyes at his antics and smiles. Inko reclaims her crochet hooks, returning to her hobby of knitting. She doesn't concern herself with her son's shenanigans. She knows that whatever his reasons for acting this way, they're likely noble and righteous. He's not a delinquent. As fortunate as Izuku is to have her as his mother, she's grateful that he's her son. Inko can count on her boy making good on his promise, and that the explanation will be worth the trust of waiting. Whereas Izuku waits for nothing, climbing into the attic without needing to use a ladder. The space is cramped and covered in more cobwebs than he can afford to weave with his own webbing, if not for his spider sense. He'd no doubt stub his toe on one of the many packing boxes covering the room in towered stacks. It takes the pull chain whipping his forehead for him to find the attic's light. The bulb burns once it's switched on, casting a yellow tint to the dusty domain. Izuku fans his hand by his mouth, fending off any floating particles that might be tempted to make him sneeze or cough. "Let's see," he muses aloud as his emerald eyes slowly search the labeled cardboard carton. The boy moves from one box to the next, naming them off. Christmas decorations, blankets, more Christmas decorations. Izuku pauses when he reads the kanji written in marker on a container that's stowed away in the back. "My old manga." He's half tempted to bust it open and binge read his collection right there. Except, he shakes his head clear, remembering that he's on a mission. Izuku moves a few boxes around in an effort to dig deeper. After a little more poking about, the boy comes across a pile of bags, and he finally finds a leather satchel with the initials HM embroidered on it. He holds it up to the attic's light. It's his father's old camera case. Izuku's eyes water, and it isn't because of the room's dust. When he opens the satchel, Hisashi Midoriya's DSLR is still inside the bag, completely intact as though brand new. There's even an SD card lodged in the device, saving him a trip to the store. Izuku's thumb presses the power button up top. Its battery life hasn't drained after all this time, leaving Izuku impressed. Whatever memory is kept preserved on the SD card becomes accessible when he powers the camera on. Pictures appear on the display screen. They're photos from a time when Izuku was younger. His mother looks less aged as well. It's stuff from a trip to America, most of the images showing them at landmarks like Mount Rushmore or the Statue of Liberty. It's all things that make the boy smile. What he doesn't realize until getting to the final picture, though, is that they all only contain him and his mother in them. The last photo is all three of the Midoriyas as a family, his father holding him and his mom close, the man grinning in between them. Everyone has always said Izuku takes after Hisashi in the genetics department. Considering Inko shares the same color of locks as her late husband, the green hair was bound to be passed down by one of them. The curls, however, those are all thanks to Hisashi's side. The man's messy mop is a spitting image of his son's. Even the freckles are a byproduct of the boy's dad. Izuku can't help but wonder if what he's looking at is an image of his future self. The glimpse ahead becomes a bit blurry, confusing him momentarily, but then he understands why when a tear drops on the tiny screen. He's crying. Of course he's crying. Oh, shoot. Izuku wipes the water off with the hem of his shirt before giving the device a few good blows in an extra added effort to dry it. He looks the camera over to make sure it isn't damaged from his tears. When he confirms that it's fine, he allows himself a few more sniffles and then proceeds to dry his face next. But this time using the sleeve of his shirt instead of the bottom. Get a grip, Izuku. He laughs at himself, voice still wet even if his eyes aren't anymore. While rugged, handsome features may have come from his father, Izuku knows that the waterworks are a trait given to him from his mother. That makes him laugh again, this time a little more humored than sad. He clicks the camera off before shoving it back into his father's bag for safekeeping. Having found what he came looking for, Izuku slips the satchel's strap over one shoulder to take it with him. He steps over the boxes, blocking him on his way back, also making sure not to exit without pulling the attic's light chain first. Izuku leaves the dark place behind, heading for a bright future that he'll be able to capture with his camera's flash. Spider-Man steps onto a roof's ridge, naturally balancing himself by making his soles stick to the slim surface. It's from there that he begins pacing, walking along the eave as he pulls his trusty notebook out from the tucked confines of his spandex. The vigilante keeps going even when reaching the ledge's end, feet moving down and under to walk beneath the overhanging architecture. He defies gravity by pacing below the platform, back the way that he came. Let's see. Whips. Spider-Man thinks aloud with mild mutters while tapping a pencil against the blank page of his notebook. Should I be expecting to stop another robbery? If so, then what would make for a good opener? Hey guys, making a withdrawal. He tests some material by rehearsing it first. For a second, there's only sky-high silence and the slap of spandex-covered feet against brick to be heard. The vigilante considering whether the joke works or not. Spider-Man ultimately winds up scribbling over the line he wrote and shaking his head. Ugh. That's lame. I have a reputation. A moment more of rethinking what he can open with when making an epic entrance leads him to trying another quip on his tongue. Hey guys, how's it hanging? But that doesn't work either. No, I used that one already, didn't I? He can't go rehashing jokes. Not only is repeating himself insincere and unbecoming as a hero, but he can imagine the humor would get old fast. Spider-Man stops, stumbling upon another self-imposed criticism of his comedy. Besides, maybe they're not all guys. Heck, it could be just one guy. He hums, hanging from his upside-down demeanor. All of the starting statements he has jotted down already get scratched off, the plural approach completely scrapped. He tries another take, hello there, even adding a little wave for added emphasis. The boy's raised hand comes back down, but towards his masked face instead of swinging down at his side. His palm places itself over his eyes as the lenses covering them squeeze into strained slithers. Ugh, am I expecting to run into General Grievous now? But when he considers the chances with some villains and their quirkiness, I guess that's not too unlikely to happen. An alarmed shrill shriek startles the boy, nearly causing him to drop his pencil and notebook as he fumbles to keep them from falling out of suspended animation. Once his gloved fingers get a good grip on them, he puts them back under the waistband of his uniform. A quick turnover from using his feet to stick to using a single hand gives him a proper perspective of the city. That bell isn't school letting out, nor is it church calling. Guess I'll just have to improvise. He was right when predicting somebody would wind up robbing a bank. The vigilante lets his fingers slip from the surface of the eave, dropping down into a free fall. It's time to spring into action. Spider-Man juts out an arm, already firing a line of webbing from the shooters concealed by his gloves. His pinky and thumb point with his index finger while the other 2 digits in between press the trigger of his customized support gear. The instant his fingers lift from his palm, he snatches the end of the thick strand shooting from the nozzle strapped to his wrist. The line goes taut, sending him curving through the air. Spider-Man's body becomes a red and blue blur that zips between buildings. The boy lets out a whoop of excitement, woo-oh-ho-oh, as he performs a thrilling maneuver that not even a skydiver would dare to do at such a height without a parachute. Mere moments later, Spider-Man swings down, already arriving on scene before any police or pro-heroes can answer the bank's alarm. The young vigilante enters the building with a series of acrobatics, feet bouncing from wall to ceiling as he ricochets across each surface. He ends the flow of movement by landing atop a bank teller's desk. Crouching into a form that qualifies as perfect pose material, this would no doubt make for a good shot to put in the paper, he thinks, wanting to make sure the camera gets his good side. Spider-Man webs it into a corner with the auto function enabled. From there, the vigilante gauges his surroundings to see what kind of situation he sprung himself into. Spider-Man does a double take, the expressive lens of his mask expanding with his eyes. There's nobody there with him. No bank tellers, no customers, and surely not a single robber. The vault isn't even open. Spider-Man glances around, looking for whatever it is he may be missing. It's not until the alarm stops ringing that he realizes he's been lured into a trap. Drones that have been painted pink uncloak themselves, at least 10 of them hovering close by with cameras of their own mounted to the bottom. The remote-piloted machines surround the vigilante, getting multiple angles of him as he twists and turns to keep track of how many there are within the room. It seems our guest of honor has arrived. A squeaky voice blares through the bank's hacked speaker system before cutting itself off. Wait, you're not any pro-hero that I recognize. A good margin of the drones hover back while one draws closer. The camera beneath the lead drone's belly whirs as it focuses and zooms on Spider-Man. I was hoping to reel in a big one, but we're already live, so I guess I'll settle for you. The disembodied voice loses its earlier flair before boosting to a higher volume again. I know what we can do. We'll have you introduce yourself. Who are you? The vigilante bounces back, doing a flip to leap over the drones, clearing them completely. The flying cameras turn in the air, making an effort to track his sudden movement. When he sticks to the ceiling only using his feet, Spider-Man gestures with his hands to the insignia on his chest. The spider emblem didn't give it away. Go figure. Whatever damage is done to his ego gets put on the back burner when he realizes there's an armada of cameras pointed directly at him. Wait, did you say that this is live? Correct, Spider Guy. Spider-Man resists the urge to correct his videographer. He has other problems, like being filmed for the internet to see. But before the vigilante can web the cameras or flee the scene, he finds himself pausing to listen a little more from the remote-controlled drone's pilot. You're the first ever guest star of Screwball's live show. Prepare to prove yourself the hero that you claim to be by completing my villainous challenge. The streamer's squeaky voice carries on with increasing enthusiasm. Spider-Man squints at the camera that's closing in on his masked face, not quite matching the energy. Gee, what if I'm too camera shy to participate? The vigilante covers the photographic lens in thick gray goop so that it backs off. Another drone flies in to replace the one that's been webbed. But Spider-Man is already turning to leave. The other UAVs follow along in an effort to block his path. They're nothing a little added agility can't help him get through. Spider-Man springs surface to surface, redirecting himself a route towards the bank's exit. Not without snatching his father's DSLR first, though. Unable to leave without it. He's just about to swing away. I guess it'll be your fault that the bombs I set up will go off all over the city then, until he hears Screwball say that. Spider-Man stops, turning back to reevaluate the challenge that he's being given. Suddenly, the bright pink drones look a little darker. The severity of the situation seems a bit more serious since the bank's security system was hacked to make this shindig happen. Screwball suddenly sounds more like a threat than a streamer trying to get views. Oh-ho, it appears Spider-Fella is reconsidering looking the other way. The feminine voice giggles with glee upon seeing she managed to gain the vigilante's attention. Will he stick around to play? Spider-Man lowers his head, staring down at the DSLR he brought with him. It serves just as much of a reminder as Screwball's dare as to what happened the last time he looked the other way. Never again. He whispers to himself, a reconfirmation of the vow he made back then before fully facing Screwball's drones. All right, I'll bite. What's your game? The vigilante hops onto a pillar that supports the ceiling, giving the villain exactly what she wants by presenting himself to the flying cameras. He figures it's a good idea to play along for now, not willing to take any chances with her bomb threat. A light clap carries audibly clear through the bank's speaker system. She seems appeased after all. You're gonna love it as much as my viewers will. Spider-Man somehow doubts that, but he listens to Screwball anyways. We'll do some sightseeing and decide whether or not Musutafu's hotspots are up to par together. The drones circle around the vigilante as though to emphasize her excitement. He watches them closely, still sticking to one of the building's support pillars. Spider-Man hesitates to ask, and what if you decide that they aren't to your liking? But it's a question that he needs answered. There's a sinking sensation in his stomach that tells him he already knows the answer, but he ignores it. Despite Screwball's clearly deranged and delusional performance, the vigilante's spider sense hasn't warned him of any danger just yet. There's some small semblance of hope that he's holding on to. I'm so glad that you asked. But that hope drops when Screwball makes puns about her aforementioned explosives. We'll do what anyone would do when visiting a landmark. We'll photobomb the place, which is always a guaranteed blast. Her laugh echoes from drone to drone, but Spider-Man doesn't reciprocate her sense of humor as he grits his teeth behind his mask instead. The villain is unfazed by the vigilante's lack of amusement, still giggling for the both of them in between the words that formulate her next sentence. Shall we get started then? Spider-Man leaps from the pillar he was occupying to perch himself atop a wall frame instead. From there, he crawls out the way that he came in. The drones continue to follow him. You really do have some screws loose, lady. The boy can't help but mutter his thoughts aloud, a habit he has no chance of breaking anytime soon. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing remains to be known when he hears an offended gasp. It's Screwball. The villain scoffs over her speaker system. This time, Spider-Man keeps what he has to say on the tip of his tongue, thinking better of himself to instigate by telling her that she's one to talk by always getting his name wrong. I'll let that one slide, but you should know that it's rude to insult a woman. He swallows his retort completely when he considers the punishment he could receive from a mad bomber. Realizing that he might need to win her favor back, he lets his body move freely while parkouring through Musutafu's concrete terrain. Some stylized moves to show off for the cameras ought to do the trick, or so he hopes. Anyways, Spider-Man clears his throat before trying to take her mind off his remark by refocusing it on the task at hand. Where to first? We don't want to get caught up in the morning crowd. Right. Screwball startles at his reminder. That seems to do the trick, much to the boy's relief. She reverts back to her streamer personality with a rejuvenated chirp to her voice only matched by the drum of her drones. Just try and keep up while I lead the way. The machines make haste with their flight as though suddenly spurred on by their controller's cue. Spider-Man leaps atop a ventilation unit before using it as a springboard to catch up. Way to keep me in suspense. The vigilante's retort flies out of his mouth faster than he spins a web to follow along. He can't help but find some satisfaction at the fact that he's getting better with his comebacks. Then again, Screwball's banter is easier to respond to than the usual death threats that simpletons shout. Spider-Man swings low, hiding the disappointment he has in himself for somewhat complimenting her. First stop, the Musutafu Monument. Screwball announces their destination when they turn a building's corner and enter a less than web-friendly area. Spider-Man drops down, a communal square waiting below him with a Torii gate as the only reliable place to land. Much to the vigilante's dread, he finds that the place is pretty populated. Doesn't it make you just want to explode with joy? Screwball's tone takes a turn when she drops her cheerful act for a more dastardly decibel. Spider-Man hops from his perch to the ground. There's no structures in the surrounding area for him to latch onto with any web lines. The silver lining that comes with a lack of foundations, though, is that Screwball's hiding spot for her bomb can be narrowed down. A simple shrine at the square's epicenter stands out as a particular place of interest. Not really. He dismisses the villain's commentary and heads for what he suspects is the right spot. As he does so, he waves for everyone in his way to move while shouting, I was actually gonna suggest that we get out of here, in a less than subtle effort to evacuate the monument. A good margin of civilians pick up on the vigilante's cue and begin to flee. When the screams start though, that's when the others who hadn't caught on to his warning follow suit, fully clearing out the shrine. Why would we do that when we have the place all to ourselves? Screwball tauntingly tisks him as her drones film the citizens running away. We can still have a blast without them. Meanwhile, Spider-Man searches the shrine for the villain's explosive. The vigilante only stops to clutch his head in order to feign a headache. You're really blowing my mind with your puns, hoping that he'll actually manage to buy himself some extra time by playing along instead of losing seconds. Judging by Screwball's speaker's squeaking laughter, it seems to work. He quickly goes back to scavenging the shrine's surroundings while he has her distracted. It's within that brief moment that he finds the bomb discreetly stowed away beneath an offering box. Spider-Man no longer needs to fake a headache, the base of his skull starting to tingle. Not that he needs the warning. He stares in the face of danger, eyes expanding with the lens of his mask when he sees mere seconds remain on the bomb's countdown. While his first instinct is to drop the explosive like it's a very hot potato, he figures that'll only set it off sooner, and he also doesn't know the range of its blast radius to take such a chance. So what he does instead is carry it with him back towards the Musutafu Monument Torii Gate. It's there that he's able to carry out a quickly conjured plan to be rid of the bomb. Spider-Man spins 2 web lines, each strand attaching to each end of the shrine entrance. He pulls them together where a pouch carries the explosive in the middle. It's a makeshift slingshot system that he hopes will be enough to launch the thing high in the sky where its detonation won't harm anybody. Spider-Man pulls back, applying pressure and power, aiming the course of fire towards the clouds. Then he lets the webs snap back and catapult the bomb overhead. An eruption of conflagration colors the sky with pink plumes of smoke. I thought dangerous gender reveals were an American thing. Spider-Man feels as though he's able to make light of the close call now that he's handled it. That doesn't make him sweat any less though. Then again, that could just be from the heat of the blast. He hops up onto the safely preserved Torii Gate whilst receiving an applause from Screwball. The feeling of relief he had fades when he's reminded of the drones that are surrounding him. Wow, that was something spectacular. Truly inspirational. Screwball sounds sardonic with her praise, but it fits the mood of the moment when Spider-Man gives an exaggerated satirical bow in response. It's what comes after that which seems a lot more genuine. So inspirational that it seems some of my viewers are taking it upon themselves to find and dispel the other bombs. The vigilante is unable to blink back his shock due to the expansive expression of his mask eye lenses. Way to steal my adoring audience with your charm, you ruin the stream. Despite his small revolution potentially putting those people in danger, Spider-Man's feeling of relief returns with one of gratitude. All that's left now that the explosives are dealt with is Screwball herself. I don't suppose that means you'll end it early and turn yourself in now. He gives asking the villain to cooperate a try. The sound of her drones humming in place of her voice is safe to say is a no. Well, he can't say it wasn't worth a shot. Who wants to watch the same spiel of you running around disarming a bunch of bombs anyhow? Screwball dismisses the matter as a minor setback with a question the boy can tell is meant to be rhetorical. While that should add to his relief, it winds up having the opposite effect when she adds, "We can just skip straight to the grand finale I had planned." The deep drumming of the drones sounds freakishly foreboding as Spider-Man is reminded how very real of a threat this woman is despite her internet personality charade. How about we don't? His riposte comes with an action in which he uses 2 web lines to tug a set of drones into one another while simultaneously pulling himself from his perch. He lands atop another UAV, crushing it with his weight. The others veer away to avoid being destroyed too. Spider-Man doesn't let them get very far though. I'd much rather wrap this up now. The web spinner weaves a net of gossamer to capture and contain the drones. He smashes a good margin of them by slamming the silken sack against the ground. All but a single drone has been eliminated. The remaining one speaker screeches from Screwball's shouts, causing her microphone to peak. The event has already been set in motion. You have no choice but to play along, Spider Jerk. And although all Spider-Man wants to do is destroy the device to prove her wrong, he has to admit that she's right. The vigilante's fists unfold as he listens to what the villain is saying. Screwball wasn't lying about her bombs. He doesn't doubt this is any different. And even if it were, he's not willing to call her out on a bluff. What is it now, nutball? He is, however, willing to take a chance when it comes to mocking her. Besides, he knows from years of experience dealing with a hot-headed bully that getting somebody worked up will cloud their rational judgment. If he can get her worked up, then it might be an exploitable weakness he can use. Remembering the way she reacted the first time that he parodied her name, he hopes that he took the right approach to attempting such an act. It's Screwball. The woman's shrill shriek of pure unbridled anger assures the boy that he chose the right insult to bait her with. The villain's drone whirs as it whips around the vigilante, piloted in a fit of rage, losing its graceful flow. Brat. Her hiss is full of so much loathing that Spider-Man is willing to bet she's regretting having him on her live stream as a guest now. And yet, the show must still go on. Her next line is full of snide satisfaction. You have a plane to catch, her drone tilting up towards the sky to direct his attention towards an aircraft high above. You have got to be kidding me, is all Spider-Man can manage to mumble from his mouth after that. All out of witty remarks, he finds himself grounded in more ways than one. This isn't the first time he wishes he had access to Airjet's support gear. It's just the one time that he actually needs it. The vigilante frantically brainstorms alternative solutions to compensate for his lack of flight capabilities regarding jetpacks or booster boots. Seriously. He's starting to think he needs his own suit support department already. Then again, that's the downsides of being a vigilante and not a professional hero. Spider-Man spins a set of web strands on the Torii Gate again. Some steps back to stretch the bands a bit sets him up for a launching mechanism. He figures if it worked the first time with Screwball's bomb, then a slightly bigger version to slingshot himself ought to be fine. Well, or so he hopes, considering it's all he can come up with on such short notice. This is crazy, this is crazy, this is crazy. The boy rapidly repeats a slurred pattern of internal to external panic, but continues pulling himself back to add more power to the catapult contraption anyways. A couple quick breaths to prepare himself isn't enough, but it has to do. With one final application of strength to the slingshot system by arching his back to bend the web strands as far as they'll go, Spider-Man aligns his projectile course for the plane above Musutafu. Then he releases his grip on the strings and lets it shoot him straight into the sky. Wind brushes against him harder than when he swings through the city. Wind presses into him as he soars higher and higher, nearly pushing him back as strong as he flies forward. All the boy can do is shout at the top of his lungs like he's on some sort of reverse roller coaster ride. Rising rather than falling brings the boy through a radical rush of vertigo. Defying gravity is not without punishment, his mind fogging as his eyes are blinded by thick white clouds. He can hardly manage a harbored intake of the air that surrounds him every which way. Not until his forceful thrust to such a height begins losing altitude. Spider-Man flails as his arc curves away from the sky above and closer to the airplane he had intended to catch mid-flight. His scream returns when he falls beneath its wings and below the aircraft's belly. It's thanks to his spider-like agility that he manages to brush his fingers against the plane's bottom. And even more so thanks to his spider-like stickiness that he manages to keep the grip. Spider-Man slides along the surface, clinging to the plane's underside with both hands and each foot for extra adhesion. It's safe to say that he needs to hold on for his dear life or else he'll go splat. Mom would so ground me if she saw this. His labored breathing makes it hard to talk out loud, but it helps him to think through the dire situation that he's found himself in. He's so high above the city now that the Musutafu monument is merely a speck below him, although being grounded doesn't sound so bad right now. He gradually crawls his way up from the bottom of the plane to the top, diverting his vision from the horrifyingly high view. Just as things don't seem like they can possibly get any more dangerous, Screwball sets off a bomb that dismantles the plane's turbine. Smoke flows from the aircraft as it ruptures and rumbles. Spider-Man's spider sense goes haywire, alerting him to what's starting to become an early descent for Musutafu. As if I didn't realize that already. He speaks to the tingling sensation rather than himself before realizing that he basically is only talking to himself still. Each side of the plane rattles, thrusters exploding a second time when what ignited as an inferno sparks another flurry of flames. Spider-Man's head is on a swivel, senses signaling him that it's only bound to get worse. Where are the professional heroes when you need them? His first instinct is to search the sky for someone like Ryukyu or Hawks who can both fly and catch the falling plane. Except, neither one of them arrives in the nick of time like he sees on the news during villain fights. He's all on his own. He's going to have to be the hero here. The boy's mind goes back to a memory of a time when he'd watch a rescue video from All Might's debut on loop. The symbol of peace actually laughed as he carried everyone out from a burning bus. What would All Might do now? The vigilante finds himself asking for a solution he knows he isn't capable of. He's not like All Might or those other heroes. In this situation, he needs his own style of rescue. No, I'm not All Might. He shakes his head to get out of it before setting his sights on the moment. What would Spider-Man do? Turbulence shakes the plane side to side. But Spider-Man stays stuck to the aircraft's roof with firm footing. While both turbines have been completely blown away, each wing is still intact. Thick webbing latches onto the two triangular extensions, stretching only when the weaver folds his hands into fists to grip them as tightly as possible. Spider-Man pulls upwards with all of his might to shift the level of descent. He begins piloting the plane manually by shifting the trajectory of air against the nose of the plane so that it blows beneath its belly and carries the wings up. A strenuous scream careens with black smoke billowing behind the aircraft. Clouds clear away when the plane gravitates further into Musutafu's airspace. Spider-Man tugs to turn the aircraft when it flies into city limits, deviating its course of descent to avoid crashing against any building. Fortunately for him, his application of strength deters the flight path to head for a harbor instead. A water landing suddenly seems like an option. There's only one remaining problem. There's a bridge in the way. Spider-Man reapplies his webbing to the plane's wings and pulls harder than before. Everything rattles as opposing forces fight one another. The boy's bones tremble just as much as the plane shakes. Spider-Man gives one final forceful tug. His webbing rips, strings snapping. The aircraft creaks as metal shifts and bends. Off comes the wings, breaking away and flinging themselves through the air as debris. The plane comes just short of doing a nosedive, passing over the brink of the bridge, just barely scraping by with a literal scrape against its abutment point. The slight impact causes the aircraft to bounce and avoid crashing front first. Spider-Man hangs onto the plane's roof while it collides with open water. A huge splash raises over him as his ride touches down. Though the ride isn't over just yet, still carried by momentum, the plane glides along the wet surface it uses as a landing strip. Waves part for the sky carrier-made flotation hauler, until it loses enough steam to bring itself into a strong lurch of a stop. Spider-Man stumbles, nearly slipping and sliding off the plane's roof. He's exhausted. He's ready to slump over and fall asleep. The boy's arms are so sore that he's barely able to raise a single one. When he does, it's not even worth the effort, since his web shooter spits and fizzles a spray of non-goopy adhesive. The nozzle hisses as nothing comes out after that except for air. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what happened. Spider-Man used up the last of his supply of webbing. He lets his arm swing back to his side, energy draining further as his attitude drops too. To make matters worse, an array of boats come into view just beneath the bridge. It's the Coast Guard, along with a few sea rescue heroes like Selkie or Gang Orca. The Oki Mariner leads their charge with a flash of red and blue lights. Oh, now they show up. Spider-Man would throw his hands up in the air to express his grievance if his arms weren't too heavy to lift. Nevertheless, he figures it's better that the heroes come later rather than never. Not that he thinks it's a good idea for him to stick around and find out if they feel the same way, considering he's a vigilante and those are illegal. It's a nice summer day. May as well go for a swim. The boy's gaze shifts from the approaching collection of ships to the water shifting in tall to low tides. He just holds out hope that it won't be too cold before diving in. After the day he's had thus far, he should have expected nothing less than a freezing harbor. His suit isn't exactly insulated to prepare for such a temperature drop. Well, it wakes him right up, at the very least. Like a cool shower or an ice bath helps to rejuvenate muscles. He's able to move just fine if it means getting out of the water faster. Glossy photos reflect through large circular lens glasses, dim lighting provided by an unshaded lamp casting a glare against the thin-framed spectacles. They slide down the bridge of the man's nose, his black wavy hair hanging to one side as well when he tilts his head to view the pictures from a different angle. Tanio Tokuda, a journalist for Juko News, sifts through more images from the set that Izuku Midoriya provided him with. Each one somehow deems itself an improvement from the previous photo. He goes from propping his elbows upon his desk in order to look at them closely to placing his full forearms across it in order to lay all of the pictures out. Tokuda finally tears his gaze from the images he was given to their originator, a boy with an ancient DSLR camera and a dream if his watery eyes are any indication. The kid's eyes aren't the only part of him that's damp. What looks like a giant green sponge atop his head is a moist mess. The boy looks like he either forgot his umbrella during a monsoon or just came out of the shower room. Considering the weather outside is as sunny as summer can get, Tokuda assumes it's the latter. Young Midoriya is being kept in suspense, waiting to hear the journalist's judgment as he lounges in an old armchair. Well, lounging would imply the kid actually allowed himself a second to relax. If anything, the boy appears less than comfortable despite sitting in a nice cushioned seat. He shifts in place every so often, wriggling with worry. If they weren't in a publishing studio, Tokuda's office light would make the situation seem like a dramatic police interrogation. Eventually, the journalist decides to take pity on the youth and finally shares his thoughts. Well, it's almost like you were on the plane. Tokuda speaks sincerely when he says the tight close-ups on Spider-Man are better than anything he'd be able to snap from a distance, and that's when taking his quirk into account. The shots appear as though they're exclusively personal. It's a masterstroke of photography he wishes he could capture with his whole body lens ability. The kid beams at the man's praise, sitting up a little straighter, until that smile dims back to the room's level of lighting. No, the boy bursts with a shout of denial a little too forcefully before dialing the pitch of his voice back down. I mean, my camera just has a really good zoom function. Tokuda gives the kid his strongest side eye ever conceived. Young Midoriya does a poor job of covering for whatever his sudden weird shift of composure is about, especially when he gives the journalist a goofy grin as though that'll smooth it over any better. Right, Tokuda uses his forefinger to push his glasses back into a position where they aren't in any danger of sliding off his face. Shrugging off the strangeness of the kid in front of him, he returns his focus to the pictures he's been brought. In any case, these are more than worthy of the reward. He can see them as front-page material already and wouldn't want to miss out on using them as such. He slides out a desk drawer to grab his checkbook. Actually, sir. The journalist pauses when he hears his guest revert to the original demure demeanor that had been there when they first started this meeting. Young Midoriya folds his hands over one another, holding them in his lap. The boy bends a bit, bowing just enough to perk Tokuda's interest even further. I was hoping for a little more than just the reward. The kid stops to swallow some saliva in order to moisten his mouth before continuing. It would be much appreciated if you allowed me to continue providing photos to your newspaper. Tokuda shifts back in his seat, somewhat surprised despite realizing such a request shouldn't come as too much of a shock. The kid's photography skills are exceptional and it'd be a shame to turn him away. On the other hand, the boy is likely much too young to begin working and it's not the journalist's call to make. He resumes with writing out Midoriya's check while also supplying the boy with the best answer he can give for the time being. Tell you what, freelance. It's the best thing for a kid your age. Tokuta rips the pay slip from his checkbook to hand over. Keep bringing me photos like this and I'll take them off your hands. That seems to be more than enough to placate the prospective photographer. A broad smile overtaking Midoriya's facial features until his freckles are folded over by cheerful creases in his cheek. Thank you so much. The boy expresses his gratitude with a complete bow. He humbly accepts Tokuta's check with trembling hands, fingers curling over the paper. I won't disappoint or let you down. A second bow that's even deeper at the waist than the first catches Tokuta by surprise. The journalist fully expects a third if he doesn't stop the boy before the conveyance of appreciation can continue. That's quite all right, young Midoriya. You're completely welcome. Tokuta waves his hands to signal for the kid to stop. When his freelancer friend picks up on the gesture, the journalist allows himself a relaxed huff of short laughter. But his amusement is brief. He sees the boy's hair is still damp before looking at the pictures on his desk again. All I ask is that you keep using that zoom function of yours. He also notices the way Midoriya's cheeks color at that comment. Be careful and don't worry about prioritizing your safety over snapping photos if things get too dangerous out there. The journalist stares at the boy a little more closely now, waiting for a response. Midoriya stiffens, a stark contrast from his bent bout of bowing earlier. His head bobs up and down, nodding a little too hurriedly. A second later, he clears his throat to speak softly and says a simple confirmation, yes, of course, sir. Some small specks of water drip from the curls of his hair as he hangs his head, making him appear almost rather ashamed. But nevertheless it's as much of a satisfying agreement to the freelancer terms and conditions that Tokuta is going to get. Then we're all done here. The journalist dismisses the kid as he slumps into the cushioning of his chair. But that doesn't mean he's fully taken his eye off of the peculiar photographer either. He doesn't miss the way that the boy jumps when he says, "See you the next time that you decide to swing by," or the nervous way Midoriya shuffles from his seat to the door after that. He waits until the kid completely leaves the room before having another look at the kid's photos. There's something more spectacularly special about them now than there was before. He ducks under a fence of bright yellow barrier tape, brushing it away with the back of his hand to pass through without having to crouch completely. In the man's other hand is a styrofoam to-go cup full of black coffee, which he's grateful to have brought with him once he sees the scene that he's just stepped foot into. A plane, or what remains of it anyways, floats within Musutafu's harbor along with a bunch of rescue rafts and safety ships. This wasn't the way that the underground hero wanted to end his night. As if he wasn't overworked already, the bags beneath his eyes paying tribute to that fact. He scratches at his stubble as he contemplates turning around before he can be noticed by anyone. The thought crosses his mind to feign ignorance and act as though he never even saw this mess in the first place. He took too long to make such a judgment call, even if it was a partial joke meant only to personally humor himself. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi is already heading his way, left hand in the left pocket of a tan overcoat while the right hand does a half wave to flag the underground hero down. The investigator is looking rather run thin himself. No doubt having skipped a meal to get here sooner than the other officers or heroes. Working late hours with unhealthy lifestyle habits is something the two have in common. Eraserhead. Tsukachi cordially greets the underground hero with a brief bow of his head and a smidgen of a smile. I'm glad that you could make it. That makes one of us. Eraserhead's quick retort isn't without charm. He returns the detective's gesture of greeting, nodding his head only a fraction. When his chin burrows into the warmth of the capture cloth wrapped around his neck like a scarf, the underground hero almost keeps it there. He instead draws heat from the coffee that he's carrying. I don't suppose you called me out here for a reason less troublesome than that vigilante case you mentioned on the phone. Taking a good long sip like the beverage is alcoholic to brace himself for what he can already presume the answer to his question will be. The detective's mouth makes a grim smile as he glances back at the plane in the harbor. When he turns his neck to face Eraserhead again, he lets his mouth straighten out. I knew he'd get himself into something way over his head sooner or later. Tsukachi clicks his tongue when referencing Spider-Man but doesn't convey any real displeasure when he adds, didn't even have time to write an analysis or to leave behind one of his cutesy calling cards. That makes the underground hero raise an eyebrow. Calling card. Analysis. He prized Tsukachi for further details. Having dealt with vigilantes in the past, they tend to leave behind messes like this whole plane debacle, but Tsukachi makes it sound as though this one is a tad bit more courteous. If his caffeinated cup of coffee wasn't enough to wake him up, this fresh information does the trick, though he does take another sip from the drink just to be safe. Tsukachi pulls a face, something slightly similar to a grimace but not quite. Well, that's actually why I called you here. He draws back with an added cringe to his expression when he sees Eraserhead's skewered stare. Spider-Man's immature trademarks tipped me off that he might be. The underground hero nearly burns his throat when swallowing a mouthful of coffee. He prays that the detective isn't about to say what he thinks the man is about to say. A bit on the young side. Eraserhead would cry if his eyes weren't always so damn dry. I was thinking that you'd have a good shot at getting through to him with your schooling background. You thought wrong. He curses UAS rat of a principal for giving him a prestigious reputation as a teacher for Japan's top hero school. It's not like he dislikes kids, it's just that they're always so impractical. Whatever hopes he had about Spider-Man earlier completely evaporate when he hears the vigilante might be a kid. It's bad enough that someone's out there illegally using their quirk without a license. But for it to be a reckless youth that he'll have to reprimand is a whole other problematic matter. I'm being serious here. Tsukachi does half an eye roll before stepping closer to the man so they can speak at a lower level. If he really is only a kid, then we need to make sure he doesn't get himself hurt thinking this thing is a game. The detective's tone is as soft as his touch when he places a hand on the underground hero's shoulder. The contact is meant to convince Eraserhead, but it winds up nearly having the opposite effect. Eraserhead pulls away. If not for what Tsukachi said, the effort to make things personal would have been futile. But the underground hero hangs his head, burdened with the weight of a painful memory when a friend of his died young due to the short-sightedness of not taking hero work seriously. It's a common mistake children make. They see heroes and think it's all about being flashy or cool. It's all power and fame without the responsibility to them. I'll see what I can do. Eraserhead grumbles in an equally low voice, but Tsukachi hears him. Thanks. Tsukachi's smile is somewhat sympathetic as he stuffs each of his hands in his coat pocket. Only somewhat though. In the meantime, I'll focus on finding the villain behind this whole bomb business. The detective has it hard himself with catching criminals as opposed to stopping vigilantes, especially when he has to deal with one capable of such destruction, a digital trail in their wake that becomes untraceable when anyone attempts to follow it. This screwball character is still out there too. Tsukachi tries not to think about the villain crossing paths with Spider-Man a second time, but he knows such a situation is bound to happen in this line of work. Izuku kicks off his shoes at the door, as is customary in the Midoriya household. However, the boy feels as though he should be kicking himself instead when thinking about his failure to capture Screwball. She had him play right into her trap, making a game out of endangering people's lives, and he just went along with it all. The stream she posted has already been clipped and reposted everywhere, highlighting his oversight as heroism just because he stopped a bomb or two. Little do they know, he thinks, that the villain is still out there and more than likely to strike again. He figures it's all his fault, that if he had confronted her directly somehow that maybe she'd be locked up behind bars already. He feels the yen from the check that he cashed in his pocket with a pat, and it feels oh so very heavy. Izuku starts to wonder if he was being vain in pursuit of fame with his performance for Screwball's stream while simultaneously snapping pictures of himself to sell. Since when did he start prioritizing power over his responsibility to do good with his quirk? He wonders. Whatever guilt there was before has now only doubled. It's not his place to be a vigilante in the first place. He hasn't proven himself worthy of being a hero by getting a license. To make it about himself instead of doing it to save lives would just be the cherry on top. But then he thinks about how he inspired Screwball's viewers to band together and help by evacuating potential bomb sites. He did that just through action as Spider-Man and not words. And if it weren't for Spider-Man, there would have been nobody to stop that plane from crashing completely. He stares down at his hand, the one capable of forming a fist that can smash down a wall or that's able to flex his fingers in order to cling and climb. He wasn't born with a quirk, he was given this one. It's a gift as much as it is a curse. Spider-Man stays because Spider-Man is needed, he decides. So long as he has the power, he also has that as a responsibility. And while on the subject of responsibility, Izuku peers around the corner of the kitchen entrance to see his mother going over a pile of bills. The poor woman has a hand clasping the side of her head as she leans against the table, stress oozing from her downtrodden demeanor. She hadn't even noticed her son coming through the door. She's too absorbed by her bank statement to be aware of anything other than her financial problems currently. Izuku's heart aches for her, weighing heavily in his chest. The yen in his pocket is just as laden, feeling as though it'll tear straight through the material of his pants. He grabs the money with the same spider power-infused hand he was staring at a mere moment ago. Izuku clears his throat, stomping his feet a few times to feign footsteps. He watches as his mom scrambles to hide the bills she has out when hearing him. His intent was solely to let her know he's home so that he doesn't scare her, not to let her succeed in keeping the bills a secret, so he heads into the kitchen without waiting for her to finish. I'm back. He forces a smile at first, but it becomes a natural one when he sees the woman who raised him. And I'm ready to tell you why I was in such a rush earlier. Inko stands, making an attempt to conceal the bills with her body. It's harder to do so when her son steps closer and closer. Izuku. She nervously checks to see if the papers within his eyeline give anything away about their money problems before covering them with a hand that she feigns as a means to prop herself up against the table. Now's not really a good time. Sorry, sweetheart. On the contrary, Izuku pulls a wad of yen out from his pocket to proudly present what his smile-turned grin is all about. Now is the best time. The money lands beside the bills when he gives it a light toss. I picked up a photography gig. The boy sheepishly shrugs as his mother glances between him and what he brought home. I figured it could help with paying for things around here since Dad's not able to help financially anymore. Oh, Izuku, honey, my sweet baby boy. Inko wastes no time embracing her son in a mama bear's bigger than just big kind of bear hug. Izuku feels his mom shaking in his arms. He can tell it's taking all that she has to resist breaking down into tears, and that makes him have a hard time fighting back the waterworks by extension. She holds him closely, shaking her head. She sniffles but stays strong as she starts to say, "You didn't have to go and do that for me. It's not your responsibility. You're wrong." Izuku's outburst surprises her so that she stops short, especially since his shout is emotional. Izuku doesn't bother hiding or suppressing the tears that are starting to trickle out now. "You are my responsibility." His voice wobbles with his body as he cries, but he still manages to find a firmness to his tone in order to show his resolve as he replies. "It is a man's responsibility to take care of the people that he loves before himself." Inko's eyes expand, stretching wider than her gaping mouth. When the initial wave of disbelief passes, then comes a forewash of tears. She shakes her head again, unable to shake the feelings overcoming her no matter how much she does or tries. Did your father tell you that?" The woman stares at the face of her son and starts to see how much he's grown. Even with water welling up in her eyes to the point of blurring her vision, Inko can still see clearly how much Izuku looks like Hisashi. Izuku nods, albeit shakily. The boy gets choked up on his words before swallowing and trying again. "He told me a lot of things that I'll keep with me for the rest of my life." Inko coughs on her chuckle until it becomes a light laughter. The tears in her eyes aren't so sad anymore. No, they are now rather fondly filled. "Your father always did have a way with words." She smiles when reflecting on memories of the man that she married. "That was a big part of what convinced me to give him a chance when he first asked me out on a date." She finds herself laughing yet again. That and his silly sense of humor. Izuku can't help but smile and laugh along with her. It was hard to figure out whether what he was saying was wise or nonsense sometimes. The boy agrees that his father did have quite a way with words. When the man worked overseas to support them financially, their conversations on the phone were significantly improved by Hisashi's skill set in speaking. "Sometimes I think you inherited that trait of his." Inko is unable to resist teasing Izuku with a poke to his ribs for extra effect. The boy squeals before breaking out into harder laughter, which only prompts his mother to do the same. The two continue cackling like goofballs, with tears still in their eyes while they do. It's not until they're catching their breath that the laughing comes to a close. Izuku wipes at his face with the back of his hand. In doing so, it's almost like he smudges his smile. The boy slowly settles down, turning somewhat somber. He opens his mouth, then closes it, then reopens it again to say, I miss him." Inko's smile wavers, falling into a forlorn form. She sighs as she blinks back the thread of more tears to replace what has dried. "Me too." Her voice cracks and so does her son's heart when he hears it. She sees him regretting saying anything and reaches out to place a hand on his head to stop him from doing so. "But I've still got you, my little provider, my personal hero." Izuku looks at the yen on the table and then back at his mother. He almost tells her the way that he got the money, right then and there, but thinks better of it when considering part of that story involves him landing a plane. He hugs her to hide his face, unable to school whatever expression overcomes it. Izuku knows the risks he's taking by being Spider-Man. He's not some naive kid thrill-seeking as a vigilante. So he also knows how much his mother would worry for him. Truth be told, he worries too sometimes, that one of these days he might not come home to her, and that'll be when and how she finds out about him. Minami Aba reclines within the comfort of her home, scrolling through a collection of comments on Screwball's latest stream with her mouse, until she hears a not-so-familiar noise coming from her doorbell. The woman jumps up from her seat, surprised by the startling sound. Her heart pounds in her chest when she thinks that it may be the police. Her head swivels to check the monitor that displays a code she developed for the sole purpose of leading them down a cyber rabbit hole in the event that they try tracing her IP address. When seeing that her system is still functioning properly, she allows herself to discard any concerns about cops at her doorstep. And yet, there's still the question as to just who the hell could be paying her a visit. Slowly, cautiously, anxiously, the woman tiptoes to her door. Minami suddenly doesn't feel like the internet personality she usually depicts herself as. All of that bravado Screwball shows to her subscribers is all but non-existent currently. Minami never gets any visitors. Never, not even from her own family. The woman, to say the least, is a bit of a shut-in. She hasn't ever even had a proper interaction with her neighbors. Minami reaches for her doorknob like it's a hot iron that'll bite her with scalding hot metallic pointy teeth. It may as well. When her tiny hand grabs the knob, she nearly pulls it back, shocked by how cold the metal is. When finally having worked up enough courage to do so, Minami opens the door to greet whoever is on the other side of it. She certainly isn't expecting to find a very tall and very handsome man. He smiles at her, handlebar mustache and well-kept beard shifting with the uplift of his cheeks. She marvels at his refined appearance. It's an extravagant one that she's all too familiar with. Dressed head to toe in a pinstriped suit, a cane in one gloved hand while the other is barehanded while sweeping through his already slicked back hair. He is a gentleman in all manner and meaning of the word. Minami recognizes him immediately, but her mouth refuses to function while it hangs open as though having lost a few screws to its hinges. Her cheeks turn as bright a red as her hair. She's unable to do anything but stare. It's hard to believe what's happening. Part of her thinks she's hallucinating him. Another side to the woman wonders if she's dreaming. All of those theories could be tested if her body weren't in a state of petrification and she were just to reach out and try touching him. As it turns out, there's no need. He bows down to her height, taking her hand in his. She wants to squeal with excitement because of how well her hand fits in his, but she still can't find her voice. Then he does the unthinkable and applies a bushy-lipped kiss to her hand. She just might faint. The charming character pulls his lips away from her knuckles to use his mouth as a means to introduce himself, despite her already knowing exactly who he is. My dear lady, I am the gentle criminal, and I would like to propose a collaboration with the darling Screwball. The internet villain's biggest fan delights in hearing that she'll get a shot at being maybe more than just a fan now. A scintillate shine presents dust particles floating within ray beams. It's as much of the outside world as these windows will allow to be let into the room, the sun having burnt the glass panes to translucent iridescence. A glare streams and shimmers along a katana that's been propped upon a weapon stand with other various sharp objects, light casting over each tool, an arsenal that ranges from size to kunai all glistening under the sunlit glow. Where illumination doesn't pour in, shadows cascade over a series of masks mounted to an otherwise barren wall. A particular face covering glimmers due to its reflective surface, sunlight streaking across the curvature shape that resembles a heater shield. A lack of carpeting or furniture leaves a natural echo of ambience in the air. For the man meditating at the epicenter of the room, that atmosphere when there aren't any honking horns from the street outside interfering is absolutely perfect for his concentration. While the morning traffic is light today, other interferences to his reverie are an entirely separate matter, such as the strident screech of his abode's silvery steel bypass entrance door sliding open. His roomie, as she calls herself, has returned from her AM outing, and he can tell as such without having the need to open his eyes because of her heels having a more than familiar fortissimo clack to them. She's half his height, and she's half his age, which makes for a distasteful deed of practically parenting the girl when he's not grabbing things off of high shelves for her, which tends to be a problem even while she's wearing those obnoxious heels that click with every step, which only disrupt his zen state of mind as they draw nearer to him. His eyelids twitch but don't part or peel open in the slightest until after he hears the affectionate name that she calls him, Uncle Chisholm. He can hear her huffing and puffing with no doubt in his mind a pout on her face. When the man spares his niece a glance, he sees that he's right. The blonde bun teen has her arms folded over each other and she's leaning all of her weight onto one side with a popped-out hip. The sassy stare that she returns his gaze with is one that he's seen many times before, more often from her but occasionally in the thin slitted irises of cats before they pounce on their prey. Why aren't you wearing the cheetah-printed yoga pants that I got you? Her attitude carries into her tone as a heated hiss. The comparisons and commonality of felines in everything makes the man sneer, especially when thinking about the thoughtful gift his niece keeps urging him to wear. The teenage girl's fashion sense vastly differs from his own. Even now, she's wearing some chic vest made to look like a lion's head. It's ridiculous. A bushy mane wraps around the back like those equally ridiculous boa scarves that she wears, the fluffy fabric anything but stylish in his eyes. Himiko. He grunts the girl's name to address her the way that she's expecting before uncrossing his legs and pushing himself up with them to stand over her. Don't tell me you're stealing clothes again. Even with his natural hunch hindering his height and her heels amplifying hers, he towers above his niece. He usually saves the intimidating stature for scum he deems deserving of it but knows from past experience how troublesome his agnate can be, so he'll sometimes spare her a reminder of what's right and wrong by using it on her. Petty theft tends to be a habit that he's having a difficult time getting her to break, though he does suppose there can be worse issues for him to deal with that raising a teenage girl can pose. The man suppresses a shudder at the thought, surprised that he can still rarely feel shivers strike his spine. Himiko hums, tapping a finger against her bottom lip to feign ponderment. No, she denies stealing anything as she sheds the vest, though not without tacking on an alternate deplorable explanation. I bought this with money I got from pickpocketing, and adding a cheeky little grin to boot. Chisholm can almost see the deep frown on his face in the reflection of her perfectly pointed teeth. She has on a school uniform, but he doubts that she actually bothered attending any early classes. The girl is proving to be quite a piece of work in all facets of teaching someone how to behave. when Himiko plucks a dagger from one of Chizome's weapon stands to twirl it playfully. He does somewhat see what part of the problem may very well be deriving from. He as an uncle may not be the greatest role model for her to have. Chizome grabs the blade from her before she can accidentally hurt herself. A sigh and a second later, all he can do is shake his head. The man is almost at his wit's end. As he returns the dagger to its rightful resting place upon a mounting rack, he finds himself lost in thought. The miscare and departure of Himiko's parents was dramatic enough. Schooling her quirk and helping her handle it properly is another matter. Then there's this. Himiko's impulsive behavior, or rather, misbehavior, is proving to be a part of her personality and not just a child's or teenager's rebellious phase. What am I going to do with you? He mumbles a question that's meant to be rhetorical, but he half-heartedly hopes someone will answer him. Himiko does. You can start by giving me a hug, and it's actually not that bad of a start to a solution. Some tenderness and care is just as important as tough parenting. Chizome can't help but chuckle a little. The way his niece has her arms spread out, waiting for him to wrap his own arms around her, it reminds him of when she was smaller. He steps into her warm embrace, ignoring the scent of blood that's in her hair and on her clothing. There's no telling whether she killed someone this morning or if it's left over from yesterday. At this point, blood is the smell of her natural perfume. So, he opts to ignore it. He instead focuses on her heartbeat against his chest. The steadiness is as soothing as the sun shining, and he nearly returns to his zen state of mind. Chizome pats Himiko on her tiny blonde head, careful not to disturb the buns she tied her hair into. He looks down at her and sees that kid again rather than the troublesome teenager, my little chameleon. His affectionate nickname for her rolls naturally off the tongue that it may as well be her actual name now. She rolls her eyes, knowing the real reason he calls her by that moniker isn't simply due to the properties of her quirk, but rather because of how her eyes never change no matter how her face might. The distinct slant she stares at him with are surprisingly innocent when coupled with the sinister smile that reveals a mouthful of fangs. He holds her a while longer before letting her go. Once released, she then carries herself in the direction of the kitchen, guiding him as much as she urges him to follow along. By the way, you never answered my question. Himiko throws her uncle a quick mischievous glare before filling Java into and switching on their bean grinder. The gray bottoms he chose to wear instead of the tights she got him are covered in coffee stain. She contemplates accidentally spilling the currently brewing batch on them to mimic the cheetah-spotted print of her gracious gift with a fuller pattern of brown patches. She figures that then he'd have to wear them either way. When she turns around to shoot another glare at her uncle, she sees that he's ignoring her with a broad newspaper held up in front of his face. Ugh. The girl rolls her eyes. Sweatpants and a tabloid. Are you sure you're my uncle and not my grandfather? Chizome crinkles the pages of the publication, folding the paper over so that he can simultaneously look at it and spare his niece a glance at the same time. Print is a superior source of information to the news station propaganda put on television. He skims the hero section for articles on incident reports to check for listed casualties or property damage and turns it to face Himiko when he finds a counted number. That's the problem with kids your age. You don't look past what's solely showboating and praise. You don't look for the full story to better understand the reality of this sham society. It's Himiko's turn to do the ignoring. Having already heard this type of tirade from her uncle a dozen times, he sees her tuning him out and waves the newspaper around to test her attentiveness. Are you even paying attention to me? Yes, Uncle Chizome, I'm paying. Himiko's absent-minded response fades off when she sees an image on the newspaper that she hadn't noticed before. She takes a small step forwards to look at it better. Atop a plane while his arms are straining to support the aircraft's wings with webs, is a boy wearing skin-tight spandex that defines the muscles he's using to do so. Himiko runs her tongue along the pointed tips of her teeth. I'm paying a whole lot of attention. She snatches the tabloid away from her uncle to look at it more closely. Being more of a gal that prefers pretty pictures over paragraph walls, Himiko only briefly skims the story to learn about the boy in the photo. When she discovers he's a vigilante and not a licensed hero, her intrigue only increases. The girl begins to blush with excitement. It's been a while since she's had a celebrity crush, and it's not too often that someone can win her affection when wearing a mask. But this appears to be a special case. Chizome takes the newspaper back from his niece while she's distracted with her fantasization of the spider-themed vigilante. It's then that he sees the article too. Another thrill-seeker, he grumbles his first impression of Spider-Man aloud. But not worth my time, and sets the tabloid aside without so much as a second thought to the unlicensed hero. Chizome subconsciously picks at the exposed olfactory nerve where his nose was caved in by a past encounter with vigilantes. The flat but marred surface flares with his nostrils. He hopes to avoid sustaining such an injury again and believes the fakes under the public eye will be more thoughtful towards pulling their punches. Cornering someone who may not be so concerned about their reputation could prove a riskier feat. Chisholm knows his limits. He can reach into cracks and crevices to pull out the weeds, but this metaphor also means being aware of thorns and what types of plants he's dealing with before derriting them. Himiko hurriedly skirts around the table, a blonde blur before she scoots out a chair and plops into it. Let's not be so hasty, Uncle Chisholm. She shoves the newspaper back into his hands so that he can have another look at the article about Spider-Man. It might be a good idea to get ahead of this one before he gets popularized. A twinkle sheens from her irises when the girl tries convincing him by transforming her cat eyes to pleading puppy eyes. The least we can do is have a look-see at him to see what he's all about. She bats her lashes with a couple of blinks for an added cuteness factor. Himiko even juts out and wobbles her lower lip. The whole act is completed by a teeter and then a tilt with her head so that it leans sideways. Chisholm bends his neck, a look of bewilderment crossing his facial features. His stare shifts and becomes a skeptical one, suspicion focusing into a sharp and thin line as his eyes narrow. He spends what seems like an eternity studying the strange behavior of his niece, occasionally cross-referencing with the newspaper in an attempt to make a connection, before settling on an outcome while making a slow shift in his seat to stand up. Another moment passes where he contemplates Himiko's begging before he finally opens his mouth to formulate a response based on what he's gathered. Chisholm's niece eagerly leans forward with anticipation evident on her face. The man sucks in a breath, then simply says, "No, HMPH. Himiko falls against the back of her chair while pouting and crossing her arms under her chest. You never let me choose who we hunt. But Chisholm is too busy occupying himself with the Java bean grinder to be affected by the small fit that she's throwing behind him. The girl tosses the newspaper aside now that she deems it useless to her cause. It lands on a column about the infamous hero hunter claiming another victim. But she's not lost in the irony of that coincidence. Her Uncle Chisholm, who so happens to be the ruthless hero hunter, will always just be her Uncle Chisholm to her, especially when all he does is deny her of any actual fun hunting while burning himself with the coffee maker. Chisholm blows into the pink mug that Himiko got him for his birthday last year before asking her, "Why are you so interested in this one?" She draws her eyes back down to the newspaper, but it's not of much use to her anymore. When she looks back up at her uncle, he's drawing a long sip from his coffee cup while waiting on an answer. They make eye contact for a moment and hold that stare as more light shines in through the windows of the kitchen. Himiko can see steam wafting from her uncle's mug under the glow of the sunbeams. A roasted aroma of bitterness and sweetness makes her wonder if he can smell what he's drinking despite having a nose job like Baltimore from those weird wizardry American films. She stifles a snort at her own sense of humor while breaking eye contact with her uncle. No particular reason, a slight shrug is all that she has to offer. But a single fang edging out to bite her bottom lip betrays her when she adds, "I just want to know if this is the kind of spider who's gonna stick around or not." Secretly, she hopes that he is. Most vigilantes don't last very long, living short-lived careers before meeting their ends one way or another. Sometimes they're stopped by the law. Other times they'll get in way over their heads with a villain. But most cases tend to be that the vigilantes simply just vanish as suddenly as they appear. Himiko wants to believe Spider-Man stands out from the rest as the type who wants to live his life the way he pleases without the world telling him what's right or wrong about it, because if so, then he's more her type than anybody will ever know. Chisholm hums with intrigue, still trying to discern what it is about Spider-Man that's caught his niece's eye. He's completely oblivious to the blush on her face when she flips back to the vigilante's photo in the newspaper. Instead, he ponders what he's taught her about his philosophy on heroes and the injustice of licensed pros nowadays, believing that has something to do with her infatuation. At some point, a lot of heroes stopped being selfless. No longer was the word hero associated with someone who saves civilians or stops criminals, but rather, it was reserved for merchandising and commercial marketing with false idols for role models to each generation of children. Vigilantes, on the other hand, are an entirely different breed. One may assume they're different from the typical hero because of the lack of a license or an agency to promote them. However, Chisholm knows better. Vigilantes garner just as much attention by being mysterious and alluring to the public. They tend to be glory hounds and thrill seekers rather than genuine do-gooders. He wonders if his lessons have been paying off, and Himiko is starting to wonder if Spider-Man falls under that category of character. When Chisholm rouses himself from his rumination, he has to do a double take upon finding an empty chair at the dining table rather than his niece. He'd been so absorbed in his own thoughts that he never noticed her getting up or leaving the room. Chisholm chases after her, finding Himiko heading out the metallic bypass door that she's slid back open. "Where are you going?" He tries and fails not to sound accusatory while asking her this question, but figures that's fine since she just got back and has no particular reason to be going out again so soon. The way that his niece flinches when she pauses only confirms he has a valid reason to suspect something is amiss. He holds off on taking another sip of coffee, trying to appear serious and stern despite still holding onto the bright pink mug. Himiko slowly turns to partially face her uncle, 1 foot halfway out the door already. Another one of those non-committable shrugs and a wry grin from the bun blonde doesn't help ease Chizome's concerns. Just going to add more to my wardrobe. An ambiguous answer alludes to much more than what she's saying. She throws up a peace sign that turns into a wave goodbye, and then she's gone before her uncle can protest. He severely doubts she'll be coming back with anything like the lion vest that she brought home this morning. He highly doubts she'll be bothering to actually go through trying on clothes at all. He just doesn't know what the alternative could possibly be for her to be running out so suddenly. Sighing into his cup before he takes a sip of the now lukewarm beverage inside it, Chizome decides not to dwell on the matter. Himiko has a lot to learn about responsibility, but he also knows she has enough power to handle herself just fine. It's this corrupt hero society that needs to worry about he and her, not the other way around. The man passes by his array of mounted masks and assorted weapons on his way to the center of the room. Then, he squats down to sit on the floor. Chizome crosses his legs and closes his eyes, trying to filter out his mind from the mystery of his niece's departure. The hero hunter returns to his meditation rather than to the dining table, so he never sees the picture of Spider-Man in the newspaper was cut out with a kitchen knife. A blue banister carries into the sky, morning moving within another summer day that splashes reflectively against the sea's surface by just a pinch of gold from the sun's shimmering arcs. Clouds careen along the brim of it all, mirroring the ocean's tide of rolling spume, fluffy frothing foam burning a bright white that matches what passes overhead. A cool mist of particles swell to contrast a warm blanket of air, waves creasing over whatever water covers the sandy bedding of the beach. It's nearly translucent within its tranquility, if not for the remaining litter that needs to be cleared away. Scrap metals, torn tire rubber, and aged appliances like a mini-fridge are still wedged within the grainy ground. Itsuka Kendo walks along Takoba Beach, still nonetheless pleased with her progress since, at the very least, she doesn't have to worry about stepping on any hidden glass shards. There's not quite as much junk piled up anymore. What stood in stacks has diminished to a low amount of garbage groupings. The redhead places her hands on her hips while surveying the shoreline, doing an estimate in her head on how much more work needs to be put into it to fully cleanse its appearance. Parked so that the loading bed is facing the beach, a white truck waits to haul a pile of trash away. Its owner, a slender blonde, swings the vehicle's door open to climb out and join Itsuka on the sand. Itsuka smiles at him kindly, a greeting he returns instead of waving. He's the one who orchestrated this whole community service thing as a training regime in the first place. He's her mentor, Toshinori Yagi, and despite his sharp angular features defining his hollow cheeks, he can prove pretty capable of doing some heavy lifting himself. Nice work. The man takes note of his pupil's handiwork as he strides toward her. You'll be ready for UA in no time. The grin on his face shows bright white teeth per his signature smile. It contagiously makes Itsuka reveal a few teeth in her own grin by being within the smile's sheer vicinity. When drawing close enough, Toshinori places a hand on his protégé's shoulder, giving it a soft squeeze of encouragement while also adding, but more importantly, you'll be ready to inherit my quirk. Itsuka looks into the sunken eyes of the man before her, beyond the shadowed border and at his righteous blue orbs that radiate as much as the sky or the ocean do. She feels both inspired and intimidated by his stare, which is the same as she feels about inheriting his power. When she was approached by the #1 hero, the symbol of peace, she wasn't expecting him to confide in her about his quirk or to offer it to her. Beneath Toshinori's baggy shirt is a cicatrix that he received years ago during a battle with what sounds like the most powerful being beside All Might himself. A fated fight between that man named All for One and the quirk that exists to oppose him, which had belonged to his brother and got moved mantle to mantle unto All Might, resulted in severe scarring. It's that injury that prevents Toshinori from maintaining his iconic buff form, and what limits him to being All Might for only a few hours a day. As such, Toshinori sought out someone to carry out his legacy. Again, Itsuka is still unbelieving that the world's greatest hero ended up choosing her. Thanks, All Might. I'll do my best to make you proud. The girl feels the weight of such a burden placed upon her shoulders via Toshinori's touch, but that responsibility is one that she's willing to accept for the sake of the world. She unconsciously clenches her fists, imagining the power that will soon fuse into them to maximize her punches. A breeze brushes against her face and tussles her sunny shade of hair. It's a moment of predecessor and successor that could be captured on a canvas, backlit as though they're being painted. Toshinori gives his successor's shoulder another soft squeeze before releasing it. That's all that I ask. His smile sparkles while his eyebrowless features upturn to express a genuine joy, and I know that beyond a doubt, you will. Itsuka wishes the malnourished man were chubby rather than skinny, since that'd make him much more huggable. Forgetting and forgiving that his bones will poke her own ribs, she expresses her gratitude with a warm embrace anyway. I know that you will. Toshinori reaffirms his statement when he sees what it means to her. Over and behind the man, Itsuka spots a flicker of green. She pauses, pulls back, then sees the source of verdance belongs to a boy's bushy head of hair. It's the boy that she remembers meeting not so long ago. Itsuka racks her brain to recall his name and then flags him down with both a shout and a wave, Midoriya. He slows his run to a steady jog before fully stopping. She figures from the way he's dressed in sweaty clothes that he's out for a morning exercise the same as her. MJ. Izuku stalls when he sees the girl that he met not so long ago. It takes him just as long to process her presence as it does to register that she's waving to him, stammering and stumbling. Izuku tries to return the gesture a little too hurriedly while heading down onto the beach. I almost didn't see you there. The boy stalls again when he realizes there's a man present with Itsuka. Minding his manners, he bows to both greet and acknowledge his elder. He nearly chokes on his own inhale of air. Nor did I notice your father. The man coughs in interception with Izuku's sentence, choking on blood. An exhale of stupefaction. He wipes at the corners of his mouth, clearing away a combo of red splatter and red blush. I'm not young Kendo's father. Toshinori sheepishly corrects Izuku on the misunderstanding. He avoids eye contact with both of the kids, opting to instead count the grains of sound beneath his feet. The beach is looking mighty beaky today. He thinks, which he also thinks is all thanks to Itsuka clearing away Takoba's filth. Who is not his daughter, just to clarify their relation to one another again. Itsuka's cheeks shade a stronger tone of pink, her blush covering her makeup. She's just as embarrassed by the misconception as her mentor, but she handles it a little better than he does. All right, this is just my sensei, Toshinori Yagi-san. She presents him with her hands, resisting the urge to enlarge them with her quirk. The flourish could use a little work, and so can the way Toshinori holds himself, but Izuku doesn't seem to mind. Itsuka then thinks to add, he's the one helping me clean up the beach, for clarification's sake. Toshinori shakes his head side to side, mirroring the movement of a hand he holds up. I can't take any of the credit for that, Kendo. I'm merely moving it out. You're the one doing the real cleaning here. He humbly gives all that honor to his pupil despite the way it makes her blush shift from pink to red. Rather than embarrass her with more praise, he decides to leave it at that. Speaking of which, I should be loading the truck bed to get this next batch ready for transfer. He subtly excuses himself with a thumb thrust over his shoulder in the direction of his vehicle while beginning to back away. It was a pleasure meeting you, Yagi-san. Izuku flashes a smile so bright that Toshinori mistakes the boy's glow for staring directly into the sun. He has to shield his eyes with the back of his hand. In doing so, he sees within his peripheral vision that Itsuka is doing the same. You too, young man. Toshinori lowers his hand when the brightness level on the boy's smile settings lowers, then uses that same hand to cover a cough, and he excuses himself again. I'll give you two some privacy. He steps away so that the duo of kids can catch up without an adult looming over them. Izuku waits a second, noting the significant change in the amount of litter on the beach. Still training for UA. He offers Itsuka a smaller smile of encouragement when he sees she made a lot of progress. The boy tries not to ogle her body, but he can see the physical efforts required to make such a movement have clearly paid off. Itsuka nods while smiling back. You know it. She fans herself until a breeze blows through and eliminates the need for a manual coolant. The wind untangles a few strands of her hair, locks lingering over her forehead. The time for the entrance exam is almost here. Itsuka brushes them back and out of her face. Izuku hums before asking, nervous? A second gust of air comes through with the tide, but the breeze has no such luck untangling the boy's mess of curls when compared to Itsuka's hair. Even so, the green bush atop his head sways side to side as he tilts his chin down. Excited, Itsuka's answer is almost immediate. When she takes a second after to mull it over though, she reconsiders her response. Okay, a little bit nervous too. The girl shyly sheds a huff of laughter. It feels good to admit to her anxiety. It's not something she wanted to confide in All Might with, since he's counting on her to pass the exam easily. Who wouldn't be? Izuku's light laughter trails behind Itsuka's. Applying for a school, any hero school, let alone the most prestigious top hero school in all of Japan, would be expected to be at least a little stress-inducing. You'll have to let me know how you do. Izuku finds himself admiring her bravery for persevering through whatever doubts she might have about taking their entrance exam. Oh, sure. It's not until Itsuka is fishing her cell phone out of her pocket that he realizes he indirectly expressed his admiration by technically asking to keep in touch. She holds it out for him to take and enter himself as a contact. I was meaning to get your number anyway. Izuku fumbles briefly, but catches the mobile phone out of partial fear of damaging it should it drop and partial spider-like agility. Really? The high-pitched squeak he lets out makes him wince before he corrects it by clearing his throat. He winds up applying a false deepness to his voice. I mean, really. But that doesn't quite sound right either. He has to fight the urge to facepalm over his own stupidity. Itsuka hides her giggle by muffling her mouth with her hand, but Izuku can still hear it and he winds up turning a shade of red as a result. As if things can't get any worse. Yeah. The redhead feigns her own deep masculine tone to mockingly tease him. Really? She sees his blush somehow get even redder as blood rushes to his face, so she fortunately decides to show mercy after that. You seem nice and I thought it'd be cool to hang out with you sometime. Little does she know that's just as bad. Hang out. The boy's ears emitting steam as his head spins. Izuku can hardly process any of what the girl is saying, his mind in a complete utter daze. Incoherently, he makes an attempt to say something. Anything. He somehow manages to ask, when? The suddenness of that question shocks the girl. She glances up and then down, left and then right. Well, I mean, Itsuka timidly suggests the first thing that comes to her mind. I have a karate class tonight. If you, maybe, I dunno, wanna come by that. She nervously nibbles her bottom lip, sneaking a glance at the boy as she waits for his answer. But Izuku is too stunned by another revelation about the girl's abilities to answer right away. You do karate. His jaw unhinges to express his audible awe. It makes sense when he thinks about it. A hero requires a combat prowess of some type. He just never considered learning any fighting styles of his own, thanks to his trusty spider sense aiding his agility like a reliable crutch to lean on. Itsuka opens her mouth to respond, but before she can utter a single syllable, the wail of police sirens interject. The source of them collectively come by in a flash of red and blue lights mounted to 3 cruisers. Izuku pivots to track the trajectory of where they're headed while Itsuka turns her neck to also watch. She's somewhat startled but shakes the interruption off before turning to face Izuku again in order to answer him. Except, what she sees when she does is that he's taking long strides backwards from her. I just remembered I have to be somewhere. His hands fidget worse than his eyes as they avoid meeting Itsuka's gaze. He eventually gives up and throws them up in the air before he turns to resume the run he had arrived at Tekoba with. Text me the details about that karate class though, please. Oddly, what Itsuka finds the strangest about that whole abrupt farewell is that he's running in the opposite direction that he had been headed in when she flagged him down. He's running the same way that the police cars went. Her eyebrows are up and her heart plummets down. The waves crashing behind her have gotten rougher. I think you scared him off. Toshinori approaches his successor from the side with an expression that crosses sympathy with amusement. He hasn't seen anybody flee a scene like that aside from villains when they're confronted by him as All Might. He knows better than to share that tidbit of information with Itsuka though. Itsuka heaves out a long and heavy groan. Gee, thanks for the vote of confidence, All Might. She turns on her heel as best as she can in the sand, grateful for the traction it gives her at the very least, and slightly storms off from her mentor to express her disdain. Toshinori received the same kind of ponytail hair flip she leaves him with enough times from his own sensei that he fully understands the meaning of his mistake. Toshinori sweat drops. Such a reaction the best display of his nervousness upon witnessing Itsuka hoist an oven from the beach's sandy bedding without having even received his quirk yet. He mutters under his breath in a quivering voice, "Why did you have to run off like that, kid?" Turn sideways. An armored vehicle takes up 2 lanes of traffic. The bulletproof back doors lay opposite of the truck, completely torn from their hinges and battered. When Izuku, donning his persona's suit as Spider-Man, arrives, the vigilante having swung ahead of the police en route to the crash site, he lands on the side that opposes honking horns from angry drivers. He holds out an extended arm with his palm open as though that'll do anything to placate them, throwing the waiting cars a quick glance. Then Spider-Man cautiously steps forward, redirecting his sights on the crashed cash cargo carrier. He tentatively tests his spider sense, waiting for a warning in case something dangerous waits around the corner. Primed, ready, fully prepared, Spider-Man moves around the blind spot and confronts what's on the other side. It's like looking in a mirror, just without the aluminum-polished glass. Reflected in the lenses of his mask is a near replica of the web-patterned face covering. 2 Spider-Mans stare at one another as though they're dear men instead, and they've now each been caught in headlights. After a moment of what might be an existential crisis, Izuku shakes off his stupor and reminds himself that he's the one and only Spider-Man. He points at the imposter, surprised to see his impersonator matching the gesture when he does, and simultaneously shouts with the fake, "Hey, don't you hate me?" Izuku doubles down with a shake of his extended finger. "And don't point at me either. You pointed first." Izuku is as amazed as he is horrified to hear a voice so similar to his own coming from the copycat. The mannerisms match him too, both Spider-Men lowering their aimed fingers. Touché. Izuku settles for a draw when it comes to that debate. There's a much more pressing matter to resolve. He crosses his arms over the spider emblazoned on his chest while standing a little straighter. "Who are you?" There's a tone of toughness he hopes gets conveyed to his doppelganger that will deter any sort of funny business. And he finds what the impersonator does next anything but funny. The red and blue costumed character juts a finger at the uncovered spider emblem on their chest whilst claiming, "I'm Spider-Man." No, you can't be Spider-Man." Izuku shakes his head in denial before replicating the imposter's gesture of aiming his thumb at his sternum's spider symbol. I quote him, Spider-Man. After a moment, he jokingly throws around a careless wave and offers, but if you play real nice, maybe you can have a turn tomorrow. Okay, well, the telltale tingle of Izuku's spider sense saves him from getting a gash across his chest. A miraculous maneuver that vaults the boy over a nearby streetlight for him to then use as a perch makes for a daring dodge. Crossing out the spider on my chest won't change anything. Izuku tentatively touches the spot that was nearly torn into before pointing with that same hand at his attacker, especially since you got the part wrong about Spider-Man using knives. He takes a second to wonder whether or not a box cutter counts as a knife before deciding that distinctive definition doesn't matter. Cool moves. The fake Spider-Man spins their pointy weapon in their hand before striking a pose, but I've got some of my own. No spider sense is necessary to know what comes next is another attack from the poser. A flying kick with their leg extended and the knife-wielding arm cocked back comes at Izuku with both an agility and grace that nearly makes him believe he actually is fighting himself. However, a real Spider-Man would be able to sense the counter-attack that Izuku meets his impersonator with. Switching his pointing posture to a hand sign that triggers a line of webbing from his web shooters, he wraps the weapon-wielding fraud of himself in sticky white goo. Both the imposter's arm and leg go down, bound by gossamer. Then the rest of Izuku's doppelganger drops. A full-body thump onto the ground leaves the faker wriggling around for a while. A while is the key term here, adapting to their entanglement to free themselves. Spider-Man's masquerader uses their box cutter to cut themselves loose. Wanna show me what else you've got? Izuku taunts his evil twin with a beckoning body motion. He even hops down from his perch to make it easier on them, when his goading doesn't result in an immediate assault. Izuku takes it a step further by producing his DSLR to snap a picture. Or would you rather show the camera? The shutter clicks when he takes another photo to follow the first. That earns a reaction. Izuku swerves from a sudden stretched-out leg aiming for his head. Such an abrupt attack and dodge makes him accidentally drop his camera, instinctually wanting to save it from getting damaged. The boy backflips to grab it underhanded and pivots backwards from a second sweeping kick. You break it and you buy it. He shouldn't expect his assailant to abide by that rule, but he feels the need to say it anyways, especially when he needs to raise his camera above his head to keep it from getting caught in the crossfire of a swipe from the aggressor's razor knife. I wonder, Spider-Man's imitator strikes straight at the original's torso as though jousting with something bigger than a box cutter. Do you care about your life as much as you do that camera? Spider-Man's evasion may or may not answer that question, but it was more rhetorical and intended to lead into the next inquiry. What about other people's lives? The box cutter repositions itself to a stabbing state and its wielder redirects themselves to face the traffic. Which do you prioritize? Sham Spidey makes a mad dash for the cars. Is all of the above an answer on this test? Izuku spins a set of 2 strings from each of the nozzles hidden beneath his web-patterned gloves. One web line catches the downward blade while the other snags the blade's holder by the crook of their elbow, showing some of his spider strength to demonstrate he's the true Spider-Man. Izuku gives both wires of webbing a good tug to pull his impersonator back from the traffic being targeted. The fraud falls on their backside, box cutter clattering on the same cement ground. Sure, they shrug off the thwarted effort to attack civilians and redirect their aggression back onto Izuku. That's fine by me. Somehow, that sends a shudder through the vigilante. His imposter could be Spider-Man. A feeling of creepy crawliness careening over Izuku's skin and making him check it for arachnids. Izuku shakes the feeling off, returning to the fight as he squats to duck below an incoming attack, his doppelganger having produced a spare box cutter to replace the one they lost. He bends back and semi-flips to dodge a secondary swipe of the blade, before those slashes can get relentless. He puts a stop to the assault by smacking the assailant's wrist with just enough force to make them drop the weapon. How am I supposed to see what you look like covered in blood if you won't let me cut you? A sudden screech full of strife comes from the fraudulent Spider-Man. The original Spidey would be lying if he doesn't admit the shout scares him. That's a good question. Izuku hopes the only thing bleeding out from him will be sarcasm as he gives his crazy copycat a quick riposte. Cause I don't think you can. The bloodthirsty box cutter enthusiast must take offense to that, since they then suddenly gain an ability to teleport with their attacks. Or maybe it's invisibility. Izuku would contemplate some theories in his analysis notebook about spiders having camouflage capabilities, and how that can potentially be a part of his quirk or this poser's, if not for his spider sense filling his mind instead. The warning doesn't prepare him for a sudden tackle into his abdomen though. His impersonator abruptly appears in front of him, or rather, on top of him. Being straddled by a variant of himself is strange to say the least. Come on, Spider-Man's look-alike leans in so close that the warmth of their breath can be felt through their mask. Izuku turns his head away, trying to avoid it like a cough. Just let me have a little taste. The sing-song tone of the thirsty bloodseeker makes him look back though, albeit only because he has to make sure he heard that right. His expressive eye lens expand to convey a combination of shock and fear. It's not hard to imagine Fangs under his impersonator's mask. Fighting a vampire would be pretty freaky. As freaky as the freak themselves. He then imagines a vampire with his ability to stick to surfaces, like an octopus, suction cups on their hands to leach plasma or something. Somehow, that's worse than the thought of fangs sinking into his neck. Eager to get the potential vampire off of him, Izuku somersaults to gain the advantage in their grounded struggle. The short grapple reverses their roles so that he's the one on top. I eat a lot of katsudon. Use your imagination. There might not be anyone able to vouch for the you are what you eat claimology, but Izuku would like to keep it that way by keeping his copycat, potential cannibal, pinned down. Beneath him, his doppelganger copies his countenance next, the white eyes on their mask widening with their own shocked reaction due to having the tables turned on them. The lenses then narrow into suggestive slithers. That coupled with some squirming makes Izuku pretty uncomfortable, especially when the secondary Spider-Man asks with a slightly seductive edge to their tone, "Is this flirting?" Izuku makes the mistake of allowing that to negate his guard via nerves, and he winds up being on the bottom again, which turns out to be a submissive state he isn't all that thrilled about when the Spider-Man on top then says, "'Cause I think we'd make a really cute couple." Talk about taking self-love a little too seriously. Izuku can't help but make a wisecrack under the pressure, though it does help to ease that tension a little by turning the situation into a joke of sorts, leading with that so he can stay calm and reclaim the advantage. He follows up with another quip while reaching under himself to distribute his camera. But sure, why don't we commemorate the moment with a photo? The flash goes off directly in his strange stalker's face. Since they aren't the real Spider-Man, they lack the spider sense to prepare for it, and that allows the genuine article to throw the phony off. Separated by a few paces between them, each of them standing on their feet again, they square off with one another. It's the fraudulent Spider-Man that makes the first move. The real Spider-Man just isn't expecting that move to be backwards and away from him instead of forwards. You can have that to remember me by. Izuku's impersonator indicates towards the camera so he knows the comment is in reference to the picture just taken. Until next time, seeing his persona as Spider-Man blow himself a kiss is something he's glad he didn't get a photo of when coupled with the others. That being said, he can't just let the crazed version of himself turn tail and escape, which is exactly what his evil twin is trying to do. Izuku thrusts out his hand, making the same hand sign he always does when spinning a web, except, this time, nothing comes out. The nozzle of his web shooter fizzles with a soft spray of leftover residue from an otherwise empty cartilage of webbing solution. Come on, not now. He wishes he could curse himself for giving his yen prize to his mom instead of using it for the chemicals he needs to make more fluid, but knows that he made the right call back then even if it means losing a criminal now. Izuku lets his hand drop to his side, slapping his waist out of frustration. Just great. The department's air conditioning is out today. Sweat seeps out from beneath the hair matted to the detective's forehead. There's no wiping his face dry when the back of his hand is just as damp. Hung over the back of his desk chair is his conventional overcoat, his office way too stuffy to be wearing a jacket. That's not all the clothing he's shed either. He'd tugged and tossed his tie a while ago. Tsukachi also tried opening the room's window to filter some air in, but the summer weather has been so unmerciful in its heat wave that there hasn't been a single cooling spell to compensate. He's been seriously considering buying a fan, the department's budget be damned. Except, having to dig splinters out of his hands every week makes him reconsider, since replacing his desk would be a wiser purchase. Then there's, not to mention, the dinged-up filing cabinet behind him. Nothing has been spared from being worn down around here, including him. Outside the doorway of his office, one of the new hires runs by to deliver something to the detective one room over. Tsukachi feels some empathy for his co-workers, reminded that he isn't the only one doing duties under these conditions. Whoever isn't caught in crossfire within the field is stuck here with the machine gun fire of tapping keyboards. A noisy ambience that's missing the hum of a coolant system can make it hard to do anything other than sigh or groan, especially when the fridge in the break room isn't stocked and the temperature is too hot for coffee. Tsukachi could never go for that iced crap. A few of his colleagues suggesting he try drinking Java cold, but he can imagine the ice melting into the drink anyway that it wouldn't really matter much. More keyboard clacking, now significantly louder for whatever reason, pulls the detective out of his thoughts. When Tsukachi hears his office door creak closed and slammed shut, he's at least grateful for a buffer that drowns out the rapid clicking of computer keyboards. What he's less than appreciative of, however, is the sudden intrusion. He half expects to see Tamakawa back from vacation already. What he finds instead is an unexpected visit from a familiar underground hero, Eraserhead. Tsukachi is just as shocked by the man's state of attire as he is by the man's presence. How the underground hero can wear a baggy bodysuit that may as well be a snuggy sweater while in this heat is beyond him. Detective. Eraserhead returns Tsukachi's nonplussed greeting with a curt nod before throwing a glance back in the direction of the office's entrance. The man's mouth is set in a straight and solid line. He has something he wants to say but is keeping withheld. We won't have any interruptions or eavesdroppers. Tsukachi tries to placate the underground hero's concerns while partially hoping to quell some of his own nerves. For Eraserhead to be cautious, there must be something serious afoot. The detective leans forward to ask, what seems to be the problem? Eraserhead remains silent a second longer, eyes still set on the door, before he finally relents. You asked me to work the Spider-Man case. The slow start to the presented topic makes Tsukachi raise a singular eyebrow. Something has come up. Eraserhead has practiced prolonging his blinks, so it comes as no surprise that he wins the staring contest when his gaze meets Tsukachi's. I wanted you to know before word got out to any kind of press. The underground hero gives the office door one final check before saying, Spider-Man robbed a transport truck. Tsukachi raises his second eyebrow along with the rest of his body as he shoots up from his seat. The chair topples over behind him, but he pays it no mind. Having heard what Eraserhead just told him, his head is much too jobbled to care about that. All he can manage to reply with is what anyone would have to say about a vigilante switching up their mo. Tsukachi releases a flabbergasted shout of his inner turmoil. What? Not a single one of the pictures that Izuku developed shows two Spider-Men together at the same time. If anything, the photos are highly incriminating towards his alter ego. There's a shot where he or his imposter is literally standing in front of the transfer truck. Izuku has half a mind to discard them all in order to spare himself from self-sabotage. There's a trash bin right beside him where he can throw them out. But then he thinks about his mom and all the bills, and he is already at Juko News that it'd be a wasted trip for him to just turn around and leave. Izuku takes a big breath and then breathes all that hot air out as one great big sigh. The boy hands his shots over, deeming the pros of doing so greater than the cons. Tokuda thumbs through the collection of photos, a humored hum escaping his mouth despite his lips remaining firmly pressed together. Each picture has a crazy composition that calls for a tripod, but one in particular really gives him pause. It's slightly blurred but so close up that it's still considerably impressive. Tokuda pulls it from the stack and turns it over for Izuku to see. With a cocked eye, he asks the young freelance photographer, "How did you get this one?" Izuku lulls when he recognizes the picture as the one he took while pinned under his impersonator. The framing aside, it's right up in their masked face. He swallows some spit before suggesting anything other than having been up close and personal, long lens. The look thrown at him is amicably suspicious, but Tokuda doesn't press the matter. Considering you're the only one to get coverage on this story, I'd say the quality of the shots don't matter so much this time as does their existence in general. He instead sets the pictures aside to talk about what's going to be written on the check that he's grabbing from his desk drawer. I'll say these are worth about half the amount as last time. You should get acquainted with that long lens of yours or do away with it and go back to the zoom function. Izuku's cheeks color crimson, but he manages to diminish the blush by shaking the blood flow back into order with a nod. I'm still getting a handle on this whole, photography thing. He scratches at his freckles as though they itch while awkwardly angling his mouth to smile. Thank you for your patience and consideration while I figure it out though. Tokuda casts aside the boy's bailiwick with a wave of his free hand while writing out the check with his other. There's a learning curve for all beginners, kid. Nothing's better than practical experience. The man recalls when he himself first had to figure out how his quirk worked when snapping pictures and laughs at the memories. His mom made scrapbooks preserving spontaneous unchoreographed early photos that he would take when startled or excited. But he doesn't quite feel so generous to share that with his young apprentice. Izuku is about to respond when his phone lets out an interjectory chime. The boy apologizes before checking what the notification is all about. He fully expects to see a text message from his mom. What he finds instead makes him sit up a little straighter in his seat. It's a text from a girl, but not his mother. It's a message from Itsuka. It's straightforward to let him know the location and time for their date. He wonders if it's a date and not just a friendly hangout like she phrased it. But that doesn't matter because it's a text from a girl who isn't his mom. Girlfriend. Tokuda's voice makes Izuku jump a little in his chair. The boy double bounces when he registers what the man actually said. A tingling sensation runs through Izuku that is distinctively different from his spider sense but still puts him on edge. He squirms in his seat while sweating. He tugs at the neck of his shirt collar in an effort to let some air under the warm material. And not exactly. Izuku nervously laughs the question off. His eyes flit from Tokuda to his phone as though he's paranoid that it'll suddenly dial Itsuka and she'll be able to hear everything. When Izuku glances back up and sees Tokuda fishing out yen to pass over, he becomes anxious for a different reason. What are you doing? He tries pushing it away. You need extra money for your date, don't you? Tokuda stops Izuku with a raised hand before again attempting to pass over a wad of yen. The man's glasses slip a little as he eyes the photos taken of Spider-Man presumably robbing a transfer truck. You can always say you were asked to be paid in advance. He forces Izuku to take the yen by pressing it into the boy's hands. But Izuku falters and fails to communicate as he looks down at the money in hands. He bends over into a bow as best as he can while seated to say, "Thank you," and then sits back up to look Tokuta in the eyes to say it again, "Thank you." Tokuta passes Izuku the check on top of what's already been given, yet again showing no real dwelling on the courtesy of charity. All he has to say in regards to it is a simple statement that only makes Izuku all the more a fumbling mess of nerves. "I was young once too." Shuriken strikes several spots, framing Endeavor's face on a hung-up poster of the number 2 ranked hero. The pointed throwing stars stick true to their target, half embedded through paper and wood. Chisholm allows his mouth to morph into a lopsided grin as his ruby red eyes admire his own handiwork. A little self-embellishment to his practice makes him eager to apply those efforts to a real scenario, though that will have to wait, especially since he can hear his niece returning from her outing, via the usual squeak and squeal of the building's bypass door sliding open. Chisholm drops the second set of shurikens he had ready in favor of welcoming Himiko home, especially since the only thing that's been on his mind since she left has been whether or not she'd be returning to him at all. Himiko hears her uncle's affectionate call over the grind of the entrance door sliding shut, "Chameleon," except that there's a touch of frigidness to his tone this time. She flashes him her signature grin, going in for a hug. Whether or not the effort to quell her caretaker's attitude will deem futile is yet to be known, until he pulls away from her embrace with a deep-seated frown. Her smile wavers, now knowing it's not worth the effort. "Where have you been?" he asks. She twists a stray strand of blonde hair on a finger, a self-effacing act that can only stall for so long while she thinks up a half-truthed white lie. Doing a little reconnaissance, she doesn't miss the twitch of disapproval within her uncle's expression. "You did teach me that we need to learn our praise habits before hunting them." The defense doesn't change very much, but she does get some self-induced pleasure out of turning the tables on his lesson. "I also told you not to disobey my orders." Chisholm drags a calloused hand up over his forehead and into his unruly tanglement of hair. He might not have graduated from UA or any other distinguished schools, but he doesn't need a degree or a doctorate to figure out his niece is referring to Spider-Man and not any of the targets they're supposed to be tracking. Looking at problems not worth our trouble only breeds trouble. He keeps his hand on his scalp so that he can attempt to soothe an oncoming migraine with some soft squeezes. Himiko's grin grows back into an upturned genuinity, as though he said something to spur that on and encourage her rather than the opposite, when the girl produces a new print of today's tabloid. This one covering a story on Spider-Man supposedly stealing from an armored transport truck. Chisholm can understand why. He slowly takes the newspaper from her to look at it more closely. And what if Spider-Man is a fake like all the others? She prompts him to reconsider his evaluation from that morning. Then, the paper crumples at the seams when his grip on it tightens. Perhaps this Spider-Man is worth hunting. Izuku, again garbed in his red and blue spider-themed spandex, swoops around a tall building in a wide arc. The web line anchored to the top of it stretches but holds throughout his entire swing, when the string goes taut and reaches the extent of its bending length. The airborne boy releases the irregular rope and fires a second strand from his other arm. This webbing wire wraps around a flagpole and helps him with a descent rather than a hoisted oscillation. Wind brushes past his flying form until he levels out a few yards above the streets below. It's about here that he'd let out a holler of exhilaration. Izuku refrains from doing so, considering this swing is about staying out of sight and unnoticed. There's people beneath him that he'd rather not alert with his arrival. The spider-themed outfit isn't just for show. The vigilante's spider powers pay tribute to their owner's costume when he sticks the landing of a crouch upon a glass-paned wall. Izuku's fingers and feet adhere to the surface once making contact, tucked between where the top and bottom half of his outfit meet. He brandishes his camera from the waistline belt. He figures he may as well snap a few shots while he's here. The boy plants a patch of webbing where the DSLR can sit nice and snug. Then he returns his focus to the setting down below. The police have the street and the transfer truck itself cordoned off. Yellow tape rustles slightly when a warm breeze blows through. Cops are on standby, the guards fanning themselves with their hats. Izuku starts second-guessing his decision to return to the scene of the crime from this morning, whilst he saw a bunch of flicks and read tons of manga to suggest it's a good idea to scavenge some evidence in such a way. He's only now realizing he got the idea from movies and manga. Plus there's the matter of cramming this stealthy search in before his date. Hangout, his phone vibrating from the same spot where he kept his camera. But then again, if gathering some bit of evidence to prove his innocence is a plausibility, then he also figures the chance might be one worth taking. Izuku takes a moment to text back Itsuka, and then he's gracefully crawling at an inverted angle to get closer to the crash site. It shocks the boy how nobody really bothers to look up or glance behind them, the guards paying him no mind when he bounds over the police line wrapping around the scene. While lax security should be a cause for concern under ordinary circumstances, Izuku is grateful for such a lazy system this time around, if only for the reason that it works in his favor. That doesn't mean he wants to spend too much time lingering around either though. The odds of being caught increase the longer he stays. So Izuku gets to work, searching the scene for anything out of the ordinary with a haste akin to the way he looked for Screwball's bombs. The spider-themed vigilante takes to the ceiling of the truck, clinging to its roof as a vantage point to look around. He hums when surveying the bags of yen still stashed away. It's not like he counted it all himself to know whether it's all still there. And there are good odds he prevented any theft with his involvement, but he still notes none of the bags appear to be disturbed. Izuku can't possibly think of a reason why anyone would want to ruin his friendly neighborhood good name, but something tells him the heist was never really a heist. The red and blue figure twists so that his arms go where his legs were, making a complete turn with his body. From there, he sees a different perspective. The doors that had been torn off have some sort of residue on them. The vigilante's eye lens narrow when he sets his sights on what looks similar to his webbing fluid. Except, when Izuku hops down to inspect the goop, he can tell that the properties of it aren't exactly the same as his. The substance squishes and slides between his glove's fingers rather than sticking. Interesting. He wipes the strange stuff off his hand but chalks it up as his first real clue to catching whoever cares to frame him. Since he doesn't recall his copycat spinning a web, he figures the goop is something to do with the imposter's non-spider-related quirk. But before Spider-Man can mull over that thought any further, his mind is filled with something else. An incredibly loud ringing that doesn't belong to his cell phone. Spider sense. Well, the vigilante narrowly avoids a throwing knife's jagged edge by swerving his neck to the side right in the nick of time. That was a close shave. Spider-Man snatches the blade's handle out of midair while turning to face its owner, and I've not even grown any facial hair yet. A malformed mashup of tattered cloth hides in the shadows of an alleyway, red occasionally flickering within the darkness. Among that crimson coating are a set of equally blood-shaded eyes. Spider-Man pivots, taking his gaze off the eerie figure, only when he feels another tingling sensation within the base of his skull. Whilst this internal alarm signal isn't as dire as the first warning, it still warrants a look behind himself. And what he finds is the set of cops on guard duty running towards him. They must have overheard his sudden scuffle and came to investigate. Spider-Man, hold it right there. One of the two officers shouts at him to surrender. The other reaches for their belt to grab a taser, mace, a gun. Spider-Man doesn't wait to find out which. Instead of holding it right where he is or surrendering, he does the opposite and springs into action. Gray goop, this kind very much so Spider-Man's webbing, binds the two policemen. You two just stick around for a while and wait for me to wrap this other guy up, yeah? The cops topple over while writhing in their gossamer cocoons, and then Spider-Man's attention returns to his attacker, returning to the scene of your crime and now assaulting two policemen. The strange as much as he is suspicious of a man steps out from the shadows to judge his opponent with a critical gaze. It seems the newspaper was right about you after all. Spider-Man returns the scathing stare with one of his own. Though definitely intimidating, his newfound enemy looks like a hobo that just rolled out of their cardboard bed. Not to mention the bad posture that the supposed bad guy has. Don't believe everything you read. Hunchback of Notre Dame and Dumber. He gestures with a finger at the creepy character and then at himself with his thumb. I'm being set up. When Spider-Man spins a web to subdue the knife thrower, he is surprised to see the man has a backup blade stashed away in his hanging cloth that's used to slice the string before it can stick. Do you expect me to believe you? The slouching stranger straightens themselves just enough to possess a powerful posture while pointing the tip of their knife at Spider-Man. I was holding out a vague hope for it. Yeah, retorts Spider-Man. He speaks with a flippancy that he doesn't feel. But then again, the last thing he wants is for a villain to know just how terrified he is. It's like this guy is exuding bloodlust now. And yet, the flippancy somehow comes naturally to him. As if the costume, by providing anonymity, somehow gives rise to a devil-may-care attitude that precludes caring about annoying anyone. Hope. The man draws a katana to replace his dagger and assumes a stance, is one thing you do not have. Izuku is used to his spider sense typically being a notification of threats behind him rather than directly in front of him. So the fact that his natural warning system is telling him to avoid the stabby stick being swung at him is more than enough of a reason to be extra cautious. He figures the blade is tipped with poison or something, twisting his torso to avoid any means of contact with it. Someone's a fan of samurai. Spider-Man bounds above a slash and a swipe of the katana with ease. Bro's got a whole sword for his weapon of choice. You're quite the pest. The swordsman sneers in a way that would suggest his nose would shrivel if he had one. Izuku pauses, lenses of his mask widening with his eyes when he realizes the guy he's fighting has no nose. Well, Voldemort, I am part spider. Izuku swivels so that he falls backwards into a one-palmed handstand, simultaneously dodging a hacking motion of Sir Stabs-a-Lot's sword. That same hand presses off the ground so that Spider-Man soars some more. The vigilante lands in a poised position that crosses crouching with squatting. Spider-Man's opponent becomes a blur, red scarf streaking behind them. Fortunately for Spider-Man, spiders can move pretty fast when they need to, which means he can match his enemy's speed well enough. 3 swings of the swordsman's katana whiz through the air rather than slicing through the spider-powered boy. Agile athletics from Spider-Man making it look easy to dodge such savage swipes of a blade. You're lucky that thing isn't a baseball bat. Izuku ultimately decides the katana is less dangerous out of his enemy's hands even if it is simple enough to evade, and yanks it from the man's grip via web line. You'd be out of the game by now otherwise. So then this is all just a game to you. The noseless menace curls his upper lip into another one of those overly exaggerated sneers he keeps making to compensate for the lack of his schnoz. Suddenly there's shuriken spiraling in a sideways spin, thrown from each of the man's outstretched hands. If it is, Spider-Man ducks down so that the throwing stars pass him by overhead. Then I'm winning. When a second set of shurikens fly at his masked face, he cartwheels backwards into a bounce off his heels to dodge those too. Children playing hero often require a dose of reality. Izuku's spider sense tells him his opponent has something hidden up their sleeve. Literally, the man is, apparently, a living arsenal of weapons. 2 sais slip out from either side of the terrible threat's bandaged arms, falling into his hands where he spins them in preparation for their usage. Izuku performs a gesture just short of facepalming, his hand pressing into his forehead as he conveys disbelief over what he's seeing. Dude, seriously, how do you get through the airport with all those things on you? Dual 3-pronged daggers dart down in an attempt to stab the young hero hopeful. Again, the vigilante veers from the blades. He may be overly reliant on the combo of his spider sense and spider agility, but it hasn't failed him yet. Spider-Man sways away from the dragging of the sais back up from the ground to his chin, all the additional pointed ends of these special stabbers coming dangerously close to the jawbone. Such a close brush makes him wish for some distance to be made. A tap of his front foot to his attacker's stomach does the trick. Only a small portion of his strength is needed to apply a decent amount of space. Once he puts a gap between himself and his opponent, Spider-Man dares to ask the real question that's been bothering him since he started their fight. Really though, who are you? He silently thinks it'd help the villain's branding as much as it does a hero's if they were to wear an insignia on their chest like he does. Each of the villain's sais stops swinging at the vigilante and instead swivel with a spin's flourish to formulate an X shape, a shrill pang from the collision of pointed steel reverberating from them when they collide. A stain on what you call this hero society, and a hunter of everyone who contributes to it. Those words are spoken with such conviction that Izuku isn't sure whether he's imagining a thick Russian accent in the man's voice or if it's that much of an aggravated growl. You're. The witty retort that had been on the tip of Izuku's tongue gets swallowed down and a quivering tone comes up from his throat instead. You're the hero hunter. If his spider sense had been screaming at him before, then it's yelling right in his ear now. Registering just exactly what kind of threat it is he's being warned about is all the more reason to trust his body's reflexes. An extension of wood whizzes past the boy as he turns his upper torso to dodge it. Attached to the end of the long stick is a sharpened stone. A stone sharp enough that it becomes embedded in the wall behind Izuku. Was that a spear? Izuku does a double take between what just flew by him and the villain that it came from. Where were you hiding that? Did it materialize out of thin air? The two turn clockwise to the transport truck covered with police tape. Below beams that support an unfinished tower, the building still under construction, they shift and move their fight into the site. It's there that a spectator follows along, bounding from support structure to support structure. A girl with her blonde hair tied into 2 messy buns grins with pointed teeth. A blush from the blood in her face, a causation from the desire to see some blood spilt. She appears as though she just came from school, a uniform skirt and kansai collar bristling with the summer breeze. She carries a backpack with her by one sling. Skipping on such slim surfaces leads to a slight slip, the girl dropping her backpack. The pouch, unzipped, opens by the frontal flap. A red and blue suit with web patterning comes spilling out. No, the blonde reaches to grab the uniform and her bag before they can fully fall, but she winds up tilting over the beam she's on and drops with it as a result. Spider-Man hears her shout, the rest of his head turning with his ear. Seeing someone in danger, the young hero hopeful prioritizes her over his battle with the hero hunter and flips himself to become airborne with the girl. A web line latches to a taller support beam and propels him forward so that he can intercept her descent. Spider-Man grabs the girl by her waist and holds her close while he swings to save her within the nick of time. Got you. He tries not to let the sound of relief bleed into his tone as he assures the girl that she's safe. He can imagine she's startled enough that she doesn't need some vigilante doubting himself. Now is one of those times that he wishes he didn't wear a mask so that he could quell her fear with a smile like All Might does. When he sees the girl is close to his age and pretty though, he decides it may be for the best that he's covering his face, even if his mask is as red as the blush beneath it anyways. The blush is more than likely a darker shade of red than his mask though. especially since the girl is cozying up to him now. She nestles her head into the crook of his neck and leans against his chest, a dainty hand placing itself over the spider emblem there. My hero. She caresses his sternum as coquettishly as sultrily as she speaks. Izuku's brain short-circuits. Luckily, his spider sense gives it a good rebooting. Izuku glances back, expecting to see Stain chasing after him or a pointy projectile. Imagine his surprise when he feels a sharp sting where his rescuee's tender touch had previously been. What had been warmth from a palm placed there now blossoms into a burning heat, probably because the girl he saved is holding a bloody knife, a knife stained with his blood to be specific. She just cut him. Hey, he calculates that they're close enough to the ground and releases his hold on her. The blonde girl drops down, landing on her feet with the gracefulness of a cat. Opposing her, Spider-Man releases his second grip, the one he still has on his web line, and also falls to his feet. It doesn't take a brainiac to deduce what just happened. He sees the backpack behind the girl that emptied its contents. A replica of his costume lays like dirty laundry in the dirt of the construction site. She's Stain's partner, confirmed by the knife toss that transfers her weapon to the hero hunter. Stain grabs the bloody blade by its handle, but makes no move to use it. Rather, his eyes narrow into sharper slithers beneath the cloth covering the upper half of his face. He too sees the replica of Spider-Man's suit. His tongue coils and rolls in his mouth before he clicks it against the roof of his upper jaw. Stain drops the knife-bladed end down so that it sinks into the ground. Both Spider-Man and the hero hunter's accomplice are shocked to see this. Uncle, Stain's niece loses her rictus grin when she realizes the man is starting to shuffle towards her rather than the vigilante. What are you doing? Quiet. Stain snaps at the girl in a tone scarier than any of the types he used on Izuku. The boy flinches, feeling sorry for the villain's niece, even if she's a villain herself, and cut his chest. Stain scoops up the Spider-Man knockoff outfit, lifting it by one hand to shove in his niece's face. We will have words about this. That Russian growl is back briefly, but not now. Spider-Man stays back, gauging the situation with a curious and yet still critical caution. The vigilante steps away ever so slightly when Stain shifts to face him again. He expects his enemy to be glaring but stares into apologetic eyes instead. The hero hunter hums, glancing up at the web that dangles overhead and then back down at the one who spun it. There's some sort of unspoken sentence that hangs heavily in the air. Words with weight. Or maybe that's still the guy's insane bloodlust. Izuku's spider sense doesn't warn him in time to prevent what happens next. Stain plucks a pellet from a pouch and throws it down with enough force that it breaks. Black smog envelopes the hero hunter and his partner until the dark cloud consumes them completely. Izuku realizes that they're trying to escape only after the smoke begins to subside. Hey, hold it. He finally moves from his spot to theirs. But it's too late. They've both already vanished. Izuku fans the residual fumes from his face while stepping through what's left of the vapor. The hand he used to wave smoke away comes down to tenderly touch the fresh mark on his sternum. Just great. On the long list of things to check off that he's royally screwed up, he can now add needing to somehow stitch up both his suit and self. How many times am I gonna let these guys get away? Then there's the matter of, despite being spared because he rescued the bad guy's niece, Stain's escape among the other villains he let get away like Screwball. Not to mention the fact that they took the fake suit with them that could have proven his innocence. Izuku sighs, bitter about what he chalks up as another failure. He's not so sure there's anything that can cheer him up at this point. Not even his phone vibrating to notify him of a message from Itsuka. Izuku's eyes widen under the lens of his mask. Itsuka. She's reminding him of what he nearly forgot, which is their date. He still has a date to get ready for. Izuku checks the time, panicking internally. And maybe a little externally too when he hops from the ground to a construction support beam. Phew, I'll just barely make it. He allows his shoulders to sag a bit from the amount of burdens placed upon them when he sees he still has about an hour left before deadline. Though the tension in them remains, and they only raise up again a split second later when he hears fire engines in the distance. The horns and sirens are adding up, coupling together. It's something big. Izuku struggles with the phone in his hand, unsure of whether he should respond to Itsuka or not, or even how or what it is he'd even say. Do I really have to? Izuku grips his cell phone a little tighter, weighing it like an option in his hand. Rescue Services is on the job. It'll turn out fine, right? But he feels a force pulling his other hand upwards so that it becomes fully outstretched in a way that typically means he's about to spin a web from it. He puts the phone away without answering Itsuka, ultimately deciding it can wait for later. He remembers the last time he left things to Rescue Services. He has the power to help. It's his responsibility to help. He remembers that much too. Spider-Man swings in the direction of the emergency sirens, setting a course for the next problem that he has to deal with. His set of shoddy red shoes have been left at the door. After all, the spent feet that slipped out of them can no longer hold their owner upright. Izuku sinks into his seat at the dining table, allowing his legs to rest next. The rest of his body follows suit. eyelids weighing as heavily as his hand when he blinks while reading the text from the cell phone held in his palm. It comes as no surprise when he sees what he sees. He knew before looking what they'd say, and he'd already looked more than once while on his way home. Still, he has to reread them just to make sure he isn't delusionally tired. Itsuka Kendo, where are you? Itsuka Kendo, you okay? Itsuka Kendo, unbelievable. You can no longer send messages to this user. She blocked him. He can't blame her. From Itsuka's perspective, he straight up ghosted and ditched her. Still, it doesn't make his night any easier, especially when his other reading material is the Juko News Night tabloid condemning him as a potential criminal under the headline Spider-Man, Hero or Menace, complete with photos he took of himself to further beg an answer from such a question. Izuku feels like if Spider-Man is a menace to anyone, that it's to himself at this point. I haven't seen you make a face like that since the time we missed All Might's autograph signing in Kyoto. Izuku's mind dives back into his body with a jolt when he hears his mom's voice invading his thoughts. What's the matter? She asks. He wasn't aware that he was making a face and can only imagine what it must have looked like. Just had a tough time making decisions today. He withholds a lot of the details but decides to be honest tonight. It breaks his heart any time that he has to tell a fib to his mother to keep his secret as Spider-Man, having already had his heart bruised so thoroughly today. A scar left on his chest, courtesy of the hero hunter, more than enough to prove that he doesn't want to do any more damage to the organ-turned punching bag. Mama Midoriya's motherly instincts kick in when she sees her son sulking. The portly brunette goes from the kitchen to the dining room. When she reaches Izuku, she places a hand on his head of inherited green hair to gently move his gaze to hers. Did you make the right choice? She's careful to use a soft tone while asking him what she thinks is the question he needs to be asked first. Izuku pauses, considering his answer for a few seconds. Inko can feel his skull shifting to tighten his face and clench his jaw. A look she can only hope holds resolution, and it is what he gives her while he responds to her with a tiny nod. Yeah, I think so. His voice is small and full of cracks, but not so delicate that his words break. She sighs, accepting that for the time being, but not entirely satisfied so long as her son isn't. Then you shouldn't feel bad about making the decision that you made. Inko ruffles his unruly mop of green curls like she's shaking out the negativity from his mind. I'm sure even All Might had tough calls to make every now and then. A hint of a smile sneaks its way onto Izuku's face at the mere mention of All Might again, especially in this form of context. The hero otaku reconsiders the number one hero with all his power and how much responsibility that amount of power must come with. Surely there's a lot of times All Might had to give up his social life in favor of his responsibility as the symbol of peace. Right. Then again, All Might is beloved by everyone. He isn't slandered or considered a menace. Well, 1 out of 2 is about even as 50-50, or so Izuku would like to believe. When Inko brushes aside the boy's phone and the newspaper-like problems being waved away and replaces them with a fresh steaming bowl of katsudon, Izuku can think of one thing All Might probably doesn't have, which ought to balance things out a bit. Izuku has an awesome mom, or so he would like to believe. Radiant light from the summer sun shines down on the city, reflecting off each building like rows of skyscraping jewelry. Today, Spider-Man barely notices Musutafu's polished pearl appearance despite swinging across its rooftops way overhead. Web slinging, which often serves as a release and a joy for him, one of the things that makes being Spider-Man fun, holds no allure even on this bright morning. Ever since his reputation was tarnished, he frankly hasn't had much of a taste for anything lately. Not even his mother's infamous katsudon dish. He stops that train of thought, derailing it himself before chucking it out of his head, pretending to drop it to the pavement dozens of yards below. If there had been any saving grace, it had been his mom's attempts to cheer him up with katsudon. He'll be grateful for that much. She had suggested he see a therapist if he doesn't feel comfortable sharing his feelings with her, even with doctor-patient confidentiality. Izuku isn't so sure he'd feel that much better revealing his double life as Spider-Man to somebody he never met before. Nah, this is better than any therapy. The boy's thoughts filter out through his mask-covered mouth since there's no worrying about anyone hearing him from so high up in the sky. This way, the only thing I feel is the wind against my face and the cool breeze in my tights. He does a little aerial maneuver as though to emphasize his point and grins a little under his mask upon pulling off the trick. Besides, it's not Spider-Man who needs help, but always somebody else that needs help. A shout loud enough to be heard even from his current heights draws Spider-Man's attention. It's as though on cue, and it isn't like he wants there to be trouble or anything, but it does make his hidden grin grow a bit now that he has something to take his mind off things. The vigilante readjusts his swing by firing a web line from his other hand so that the wire of webbing anchors to a building opposite of his current path. Then he pulls himself in the direction of the desperate cry for help. It's a familiar sight that he sees from the sky. A speck retreating from another speck amongst indifferent dots gradually grows until increasing to a size that shows what they really are. A purse snatcher fleeing from an innocent old lady comes into view for Spider-Man once he swings low enough. Instead of launching another web line towards the buildings suspended above, he spins a string straight for the thief. The web snags the purse that the crook is holding instead. Izuku's aim was just a little off, but he's still glad because it's better than missing his quarry completely. Hey, is that Gucci brand? Let me have a look. A jeering joke alerts the purse snatcher to the vigilante's arrival before the web line's firm pull does. The handbag flies into Spider-Man's gloved palm. Hey, the purse snatcher stops short when he realizes the purse has now been snatched from him. Spider-Man looks the man up and down, seeing that the bag clashes with a rather punkish aesthetic. Purple mohawk, facial piercings. It just doesn't work. Give that back. Although the punk himself apparently disagrees. Funny you should say that. Spider-Man quickly wraps things up before hopping down to street level. Literally, the punk doesn't say much else with webbing sealing his mouth shut. Nor does he do any more snatching or running away with the rest of his body as equally bundled up. I was just about to suggest the same to you. Spider-Man figures it's all in a day's work after that. Except, when he hands the purse back to its rightful owner, he doesn't quite get the thanks he expects or deserves. Menace. The grandma has quite a mouth on her when she spews a few alternative unaffectionate names at the spider-themed vigilante. She also starts whacking him with her purse, now having been supplied with a weapon from the very same person that she's using it on. Oh, hey, what gives? Spider-Man shields his head with his arms to block the blows that his spider sense deems insignificant to warn him. But some of those blows land pretty hard, so he backflips away and sticks to a higher spot where the old lady won't be able to reach him. Unfortunately for the vigilante, the grandma gains enough attention with her behavior to garner a group of more civilians, and her backup has no qualms about throwing things at him to account for that distance. Tomatoes splat and cans crack when groceries get tossed his way. Spider-Man scrambles up the wall in a full retreat as he's verbally assaulted to go along with the flogging. He's only able to escape the crowd's booing by ducking into a dark alley. I didn't think my reputation was that tarnished. Izuku goes back to feeling dejected now that his effort to forget about his problems turned into another harsh reminder of them. The whole neighborhood, no, scratch that, the entire city has been turned against him. He solemnly shakes his head. It's not like he's in the hero biz for the praise, but it does bring him down a bit to be considered a criminal. A trash can sits opposite to a dumpster, probably separate disposals for whatever businesses interconnect to the back alley. Izuku bounds over to the can, peering inside to see that it's empty. Part of him wants to shed his suit and throw it in there. Spider-Man no more. Might make for a good following headline to Hero or Menace. But that other side of him knows that he'd regret it later. Doing the right thing doesn't mean you'll always be rewarded. That's the funny thing about responsibility. Deciding that Spidey stays for now, he starts crawling his way back up the alley wall. He's just about to reach the top and hoist himself over onto the roof when he hears something back down below. It's distant but not as hushed as one might think a hidden conversation might be. Izuku twists himself to have his hands front first on the wall and climbs towards the source of noise. He makes sure to be much quieter than the two talking. And it is two talking. He can tell that much upon getting nearer to the voices. I'm the only trigger supplier left in Japan. One of the speakers has a buzzing drone in their tone that sounds more like a side effect of their quirk than intentional speech pattern. The decibel sharpens to a sting when they add, "You don't have much of a choice but to pay the price that I give you for it." The other talker has some sort of voice filter disguising their voice, the type that meshes a high pitch and a low pitch together to formulate one tweaked tone. You're forgetting that the Yakuza has drugs too. The distortion discloses their mood that it sounds like a monotonous machine, but it's anyone's good guess that they aren't happy just by what they're saying. I could always buy from them. Who do you think they get their resources from? The other voice's buzz becomes brasher. It seems they're both irritated by their discussion. Prices go up when it's a matter of resale value. A cross between hissing and humming tails the end of that sentence like a period. Spider-Man doesn't require his spider sense to know things are bound to escalate if the attitude these two are giving each other stays the same. Intrigue increased and now prepared to intervene if a fight breaks out, the wall crawler carries himself closer. He's able to see the two back alley conversationalists clearly, but they're unable to see him so long as they don't look up. He hopes things stay that way. You're sure they are? None of your other resellers aren't able to replicate it? The altered voice belongs to a man dressed like a parrot, hummingbird. Green wings that are way too sharp to be comprised of feathers are enclosed at his sides. A matching metallic mask shaped into a long beak hides his face. The other person also covers their tracks well, a lavender hood hanging over their head and draping down into a cloaked cape. If they were capable of pulling that off, then Trigger wouldn't be in such short supply with such a high demand. Small specks wisp around the cloth, weaving in and out of it. At Izuku's distance, it's hard to see just what those specks are though. That susurated sound emitting from the hooded figure suddenly seems a lot louder. Pretty soon, Izuku's spider sense buzzes with it. He looks about to find the source and discovers a small bee bumbling around beside him. Izuku waves a hand to shoo it away, but the bug is unbothered by his attempts to scare it off. The buzzing of the boy's spider sense gets more intense than the bee's buzzing, causing him to return his attention to the two people below. The hooded figure is staring back, or rather, a swarm of bees under a cowl directs their focus on him. We're being watched. The organized droning that composes a voice alerts the bird bad guy of Spider-Man next, which causes Izuku to backpedal on all fours along the wall that he's clinging to. Oh god. Izuku shudders when he realizes what those specks are under the lavender cloak, not the bees. When the cloak levitates and ascends out of the alley, Izuku is surprised to see it's the bird person who remains grounded. Wait, the flightless fellow calls after their partner in crime when they see that there is no honor amongst thieves, a sentiment that Spider-Man can agree with when spinning a web line to snag the swarm's fancy row. What he said, nobody told you to buzz off just yet. Izuku gives the web line a good tug to reel his quarry in. What he gets is only the lavender cloak, the fabric flying off and a whole hive mind of bees exposed in the sunlit sky still managing to slip away. The lenses on Spider-Man's mask expand as much as they can when he sees there's seemingly no physical body to this baddie. The vigilante shakes it off, filing that one away for a later date. The buzzard villain is still here, at the very least, and he doesn't plan on letting that one get away as easily. And where'd you come from? Sesame Street. Spider-Man hops overhead just in case this fellow tries flying the coop too. He watches the end of the alley to make sure they don't try to make a break for it on foot either, which is where that empty trash can is. I did see Oscar's house close by, come to think of it. Spider-Man. The metallic wings that had been tucked behind the villain's back suddenly expand into steeled feathers that are sharpened to a point. He crouches while preparing for liftoff, or maybe he's just striking a fighting pose. Either way, the vigilante has his full undivided attention now. Was it the web-patterned suit that gave me away? Spider-Man judges the jumping distance between himself and the villain before springing from his spot on the wall. It's all in good timing when he sticks the landing on a fiend taking flight. No, get off. The tackle causes some turbulence, but Spider-Man isn't so willing to oblige to that request. I'm not the one you should be going after. Even after hearing that, the airborne duo dive down towards street traffic, narrowly avoiding a brush with passing cars. You need to understand, I'm not someone you want to fight. I'm not a bad guy. Spider-Man's struggling ceases momentarily. I work for the Commission. But then he's back to trying to land his opponent. The Commission. Yeah, right. Let me guess. The leader of your secret organization is a stereotypical big fat guy with a diamond-topped cane and an ascot. Spider-Man's skepticism comes out in the form of sarcasm. He's well enough versed on heroes that he doubts this guy is an underground hero, and he's never heard of some task force before either. There is one way to know for certain, though. Spider-Man grabs for the guy's beak-shaped face covering. No, the feathered fink fights back. Spider-Man swerves as he's skybound, dodging a sweep of the villain's bladed wings. It takes some aerial acrobatics, but the vigilante manages to stay attached to his flying foe all the while. I'm trying to tell you that there's no need for this. The filtered voice practically screeches through the helmet's speaker system. Spider-Man shouts back to be heard over the wind whipping around them. You sure have a funny way of doing so. His back bangs against a rooftop's trimming when the bird baddie tries shaking him off again. The two twist whilst doing a nosedive, the maneuver meant to disorient and throw Spider-Man off, while Izuku might admit to getting a tad bit dizzy. He still manages to keep a hold of his pilot as a passenger. I'm starting to think you are a menace like the paper says. The villain glances back at their unwanted freerider with what must be contempt underneath the visor of their helmet. A menace to guys like you. Any and every day of the week, bird brain. Spider-Man cocks an arm back as he prepares to throw a punch, planning on cracking that stupid beak-shaped mask wide open like an eggshell. But his spider sense stops him short. He has to swing himself back to avoid getting clotheslined by a flagpole, which leaves him open for an uppercut from the villain. He maintains his hold, but in doing so, earns himself another shot. Izuku isn't content with letting a bad guy have their way with him, but there's not much else he can do if he doesn't want them to get away. The two grapple some more as they get close to a particular rooftop. They nearly crash into a billboard sign before slamming into the side of a water tower instead. It's there that Izuku loses his grip, and his opponent takes immediate action with that advantage. Izuku finds himself getting thrown into the elevated tank concealed inside. If it were a giant waterspout, he's certain that he'd drown in it. Don't think that'll stop me. Izuku calls out from his water-enclosed prison with the vain hope that he'll be heard. A good spring in his step launches the boy up and out of the water tower. Except, once he's perched atop the elevated tank, he sees that the person who stuffed him inside is long gone. He gets flashbacks to similar situations with lockers and bullies, and he's sure that there'll be plenty more made when the next school semester starts. He just didn't think he'd be getting a head start of practice and beforehand. Great way to start the morning. Izuku huffs and grumbles to himself. He shifts from a squatted position to sit down before tugging a spandex sock off. The sopping material squelches when he wrings it out, soaked to my skin and still hated by the general public. The vigilante allows himself to feel a bit of angst before sliding the spandex sock back on and getting over it. There's still a lot to be done on his to-do list, and he won't let a little plunge in the pool or some negative Nancy's ruin it for him. He was able to, at the very least, save his camera from getting water damaged, which means he'll have some shots to sell. And there's a particular beach he plans on paying a visit later too, even if he won't be swimming there. He's already done plenty of cooling off already, courtesy of his friendly neighborhood buzzard boy. Spider-Man hops off of his perch and spins a new web line in order to swing to his next destination. If he's fortunate, there won't be any more causes for interference, though he can't remember the last time he wasn't unfortunate enough to think that. Izuku can't help but contain some contempt for the pigeons swimming above him within the oceanic blue sky. When silvery feathers that have sunlight sheening through them gracefully descend rather than feces though, he reconsiders his vendetta for birds and limits it to one in particular. It's not like they're all in cahoots with one another, or so he thinks. The lens on the boy's mask narrow when he shoots the sky a suspicious stare. It seems silly to be paranoid without his spider sense so much as registering a single tingle of threat, so he shakes his head and goes back to terraining the city. The boy bounds from rooftop to rooftop as he nears Juko News, only to discover an empty parking lot and darkened windows with their blinds closed. The lens on his mask blink with his eyes. A little creepage down the wall of the building gets him close enough to read a sign. The place is closed. Of all the dumb luck, he can't even sell the photos he got of his own humiliation like he had last time. He gives a rough sigh before scaling the building back up and away from any potential people booing him again. The last thing he needs right now is another put-down, which is why he's dreading the decision to make a second stop before heading home. A strand of webbing shoots out from Spider-Man's wrist and anchors itself to a cell phone tower. Then he's off. A sailing in the wind that's controlled by spinning strings sends him splashing through the sea-colored sky. Radiating off seashells in the sand are streaming strands of sunlight. The yellow glow along the smooth surface is simulating a burning grill with its graininess compacted. That long line formulates a perfect path only darkened along one edge by waves bordering into it. It's as clear as the stretch of water beyond it. Not a single speck of scrap metal or litter juts out from the beach. Itsuka finished cleaning it all. Nobody would ever guess Takoba Beach had been a dumping ground for waste of varying types. Izuku would like to tell Itsuka that he's impressed by her handiwork, but she's nowhere to be seen. Which is a shame because that was the reason that he came here in the first place. He was hoping to explain himself to her and get unblocked, but that doesn't seem very likely now that she's finished doing her voluntary community service. The boy sighs, mentally scratching out another unmet task in his imaginary to-do list. First his flop with getting paid for pictures and now this. He's been so down in his luck lately that he makes sure to watch out for any ladders or black cats. Neither of his identities can seem to catch a break. At this point, he wouldn't be surprised if he ran into one of his old bullies. That they'd be the only people actually around somehow feels practical. He quickly gets rid of that thought before he jinxes himself and makes it happen, instead opting for just swinging straight home. A lone seagull flaps its wings to slow its landing. Once planting itself on the beach, it looks up to see Spider-Man taking to the sky that it left. Still clad in red and blue, Izuku clandestinely crawls his way through his bedroom window. Spiders tend to creep carefully into corners, unnoticed and unheard. Whether the bite that gave him his inherent abilities passed that skill along or not, it's a quality matching his namesake that has helped him hide those definitive gifted powers from his mother. As quiet as a mouse, Izuku spares a second to thank God he wasn't bitten by a radioactive rat. The boy moves from his ceiling to his wall. It's not until the boy turns right side up that he notices a note taped to his computer, the note informing him that his stealthy entry wasn't necessary. His mom wrote a message letting him know she went out for the day. Izuku's smile is the first thing unveiled when he pulls his mask off. Not only does his mom deserve a day out for herself, but his luck finally allows for him to have some time to do some Spider-Manning without having to worry about her finding out. Izuku tosses the facial covering aside, allowing it to fall to the floor where dirty laundry casts a pattern of other clothing. Next, off comes the gloves and the web shooters. Those go on his desk where he keeps a miniature screwdriver and other tools to touch up the support equipment occasionally. But in the meantime, he opts for a seat at his computer to do some researching on other potential gadgets. After having so many encounters with villains but all of them managing to get away as of late, he's been trying to think of a solution. The notebook he tucked between quirk analysis journals contains some of those thoughts in the form of writing. He grabs the book and flips through its pages to find where he left off before syncing up the data with a web page. Izuku taps a couple of keys and follows along with what some forums say, jotting down what he agrees with and disregarding the rest. A miniature tracking device. That's his goal here. It'd be a plus if he could get the device to somehow also be in the shape of a spider. He figures that'd make it all the less discoverable too. The only hitch in that idea is how difficult portably wireless relays tend to need more packaging in their mechanical makeup. In other words, he can't fit all the required tech into such a compact widget, not if he wants the signal to span a good length, at least. So Izuku spends a lot of his time trying to think of a way to remedy that problem. The city does have a lot of cell phone towers, and there's always satellite dishes he can bounce the signal off of. Except, that becomes too contingent on the person he'd be tracking staying within city limits. Someone suggested having the opposite receiver carry all the tech on them to compensate, but that wouldn't work since that'd mean asking villains nicely to do so. He can't blame his online helpers though, since he has to keep details scarce enough for them to not figure out what he needs trackers for. Needing a break away from his computer to simply think to himself, he gets up to grab some clothes off the floor. A few sniff tests help him find a sweater and a pair of pajama bottoms that he can wear to cover up his spider-themed spandex. An idea enters his head then. He starts thinking about how he can use his senses. If he could somehow interlink his sense of smell or possibly his hearing to pick up a specific decibel, then that could compensate for his signal. Except that the matter of distance still remains a major issue. The range in which he'd be able to smell or hear is a fundamental factor that not even his spider abilities increased enough to resolve. And then it hits him like his palm against the side of his head. He has a built-in signal already. His spider sense. He figures that if he can somehow link the tracer to his danger sense that he'd be able to track someone based on how sensitive the tingling. It's a bit of a long shot since technology and organic matter don't tend to mix well, but he also believes it's worth a try. Especially since this method would allow for him to make his tracking devices as small as possible per his preference. A quick search for forums about heroes having quirk support gear specifically built to aid or enhance their quirk helps to spur him on a little further. Present Mike has a speaker system created as a collar that helps him calibrate and control his vocal cords, for instance. Something that takes his internal power and makes it external doesn't seem all that impossible after all. Eventually, blueprints and plans lead to the actual activity of building these things. Izuku flips on his desk lamp as he leans forward to get a better look at what he's putting together. Tweezers maneuver metal parts that are nearly at a microscopic level. It takes a scientific mind to see what parts of the process work for this type of surgery. Wires that can leak fluid like blood vessels or veins are carefully connected. The spider sense that's meant to tune into and link with the device warns him when he nearly makes a mistake or two, preventing short-circuiting or spark bursts. His eyes narrow with intent focus. He'd probably have needed a pair of glasses to see something so small if not for his enhanced senses, which fortunately include sight. Izuku pays no mind to the bead of sweat rolling off his face while he works. He's in the zone now. Afternoon shadows move across his room, and at some point, the window in which he entered loses the sun. Izuku barely notices that or his mom peering into the room as night falls. He didn't hear her come home or call his name. But Inko is okay with that. She's just happy that her son found something to be passionate about again, something other than being a hero, little does she know. A cool splash of water washes over Tsukachi's face, the hands that had been cupping that water lingering rather than sliding away with what drips from his bottom jaw. He typically tries waking up to his mornings with a shower and then a cup of coffee, but today calls for this extra measure. The detective stops the sink from jacking up the department's plumbing bill. They don't need any extra cutbacks, and looks at himself in the mirror. He'd never win a competition against Eraserhead when it comes to who has the droopiest eye bags, but he can certainly qualify for second place. In addition to Spider-Man, Trigger is back on the streets. And that's splitting the underground hero's attention as much as it is the department's. He doesn't know whether he'd be lucky for the two cases to intersect or unfortunate, but he half expects some sort of connection sooner rather than later. And as such, that means making up a corkboard with strings in the whole 9 yards, which if he's wrong that they won't connect, will mean he'd be doing that work for nothing. Meaning he won't get anywhere with either case and he'll be pulling another all-nighter. Tsukachi doesn't even bother wiping his face with paper towels. He lets the dampness remain as a reminder of how vexing the day is going to be. As though the universe is deciding to emphasize his point, he winds up bumping into Tamakawa on his way out of the restroom. Turns out the cat cop is back from his vacation. There's my favorite detective. The returning co-worker seems chipper despite having come back to duty. That's a surefire way to tell he's not been doing his paperwork. A smile playing at the tabby-headed officer's whiskered maw. Missed me? Can't say I have. Tsukachi may be able to disguise his tone, but he can't hide his own small smile. He'd never admit to it, but he may have actually missed the chucklehead. That doesn't mean Tamakawa is any less distracting, though. And he really can't afford a distraction at this stage in either the Spider-Man or Trigger investigations. I'll catch you later, though. The detective gives his colleague a friendly pat on the shoulder as he brushes by. That's it. That's all I get. Tsukachi can hear Tamakawa whining behind him, but he knows better than to stop or look back. The best he can do is give a half-hearted wave of his hand. Sticking around and playing into Tamakawa's neediness will only lead him to the break room or someplace other than his own desk. which is where he needs to be, and where he finds Eraserhead waiting for him. The detective raises an eyebrow, wondering if the underground hero snuck his way in or bothered going through the front desk, considering they hadn't crossed paths earlier. Regardless, Tsukachi wastes no more time in shutting his door and getting down to business. Hope I didn't keep you waiting. He pulls out a chair for Eraserhead to sit in before plopping down into his own. Eraserhead's only acknowledgement to an answer of how long he might have been waiting is a barely audible grunt. Was that Tamakawa's voice I heard? He's rather more interested in Tamakawa, which makes the man's poker face funny now that the detective knows what's hiding behind it. Tsukachi stifles a laugh, nodding. He happened to come back from his vacation today. The detective is already plotting how he can pit the cat-loving underground hero and the cat quirk cop together in the same room. Fortunately for him, he doesn't have to plot too much. We should get him in on this. Eraserhead suggests Tamakawa's involvement in the case. It might help to have a fresh perspective. He even offers a logical excuse for the partnership. Come to think of it, that excuse may be actually logical in a sense. To get an outside-looking opinion on the matter from an officer who hasn't been around to know anything about the situation could prove beneficial. Let's go grab him then. Tsukachi reconsiders the case and his co-workers return now that the vexation is able to have some merit to it. The least we can do with him is have him scope out the scene for us. Aizawa agrees with a nod that may as well serve as a smile. Somewhat surprisingly, the shy Hasekai aren't exactly subtle with their stronghold. It could have to do with that whole hiding in plain sight thing. Then again, they probably wouldn't have bothered erecting concrete walls to hide their property if that were entirely the case. Izuku bets they didn't build those barriers with spider-powered individuals in mind though, or the types that like to fly and get an aerial view. The old Japanese architecture all dates back to a pre-quirk era. Suited up as Spider-Man, Izuku infiltrates the site as stealthily as he can. He remembered the Yakuza being mentioned during whatever illegal transaction he interrupted and decided that it'd be a good lead to follow up on, if not for the sake of testing his newly developed spider tracers. And apparently, that hunch was as good as any instinct to act upon. None other than Bird Brain himself stands across from what must be Yakuza representatives. Gripped in the fiendish Sphinx talons is a plastic bag that makes it evidently clear where the payload is. Izuku figures whatever drug that living hive mind had to offer is also available here. If one seller falls through, then there's always the next best option. This bird apparently needs a little help when it comes to getting high. So, Izuku places his camera in a good spot to snap some shots and takes into account what some wildlife photography may have to offer. No wonder Toucan Sam got the serial mascot job instead of you. Spider-Man flips from the wall to a more revealing spot where the group of baddies can see him. You may have the Fruit Loopiness down, but you'd make a bad spokesperson if kids saw this. It does the trick. They're focused on him and not his hidden camera. Now, he can get down to business. You again. You're ruining everything. The Fruit Loops mascot retaliates towards Spider-Man's second interference with a literal lashing out of his winged arm. The sweeping appendage releases a barrage of bladed feathers that are flung full force at the vigilante. Spider-Man contorts his movements to outmaneuver the projectiles before sticking his landing on a water fountain's center statue that's made to look like some sort of unicorn lady. I have a knack for that. He keeps up his quippage and takes to dodging some cover fire from the Yakuza people next. The gun-toting thugs are easy enough to dispatch. A little webbing here and there with occasional front flips or back flips manages to take them down quickly. It's their feathered friend that Spider-Man wants to keep an eye on. Stay out of business that you don't understand. He's not sure whether to consider himself lucky or not when he sees the bird hasn't tried flying the coop. While the villain staying grounded does make the vigilante's job easier, it does seem a little odd for the bird brain to be choosing fight in their fight or flight response. I've played enough Monopoly to understand what's important. Spider-Man snatches the money bag with a thick line of webbing, yoink, and catches it in the same extended hand. The beaked baddie's mask tilts, noting the cash grab, which is a little less of a reaction than Spider-Man had been expecting. Nevertheless, he takes to the water fountain statue again for a good vantage point and prepares for what comes next. What comes next is a buzzing, but not the typical type that he gets from his spider sense. Spider-Man glances up, recognizing the sound as a signature to the swarm of bees heading his way. Looks like someone else wants the honeypot. Izuku has enough time for one last wisecrack before dropping down to avoid getting stung to death. He lands in the fountain's water pool, hoping that the theory about water warding off bees holds true. It's strange that the cool splash of water loses its initial chill seconds after. A stroke of heat hovers over Izuku's back. For a moment, he fears the worst, that he's been stung or hit somehow. Except, when he turns over, he sees the source of warmth targeting someone other than him. A wrist-mounted flamethrower from the bird villain burns the swarm with a streak of fire. Izuku shields himself from the orange consumption as well as he can in what may as well be a kiddie pool. Confused by their spat and very much not wanting to get caught up in it, Izuku dives away from the two villains. In doing so, he finds himself by the gate of the facility. which so happens to be the entrance, which so happens to have a police officer outside of it. The cop has a cat-like head, ears perked and eyes dilated as he stares up at Spider-Man. Izuku looks down at the clear bag of money that he's holding in his hand and then back up. He has flashbacks to his framing with the transfer truck and tenderly hoists the yen sack out to emphasize his innocence within the misunderstanding when he says, "This isn't what it looks like." But it very much looks too much like what it looks like, he guesses, because the officer's response is to draw his weapon and shout, "Hold it right there. Maybe you should hold onto it instead." Spider-Man tosses the bag towards the law enforcer. As expected, the officer's innate reaction is to catch it, which means dropping their gun, which means Spider-Man can get away without getting shot. Tamakawa gawks when he's left with the sack of yen. He'd been sent to the Shai Hasekai stronghold to perform reconnaissance. He wasn't expecting all of this. To be fair to the vigilante, neither had he. Spider-Man swings around an old architecture before landing on its roof. From there, he sees the swarm of bees being dealt with. The druggie is also a murderer. Go figure. And now the murderer wants to flee the scene. Not on my watch. Izuku does what he had anticipated he'd be doing in coming here. He performs a field test of his new support gear and fires a spider tracer from his wrist shooters. It lands on the villain's calf and stays. After watching it fly away, he starts listening to his spider sense and puts the tracer to the test. The bird-themed villain, along with the spider tracer attached to him, gradually glides from the sky to the mid-level height of building. It's there that his front-facing flight path redirects itself into a feet-first landing. Like a platform prepared for him, he comes upon a broad balcony with equally wide glass panes opened up for him. That entry overlooking Musutafu leads into a dimmer setting with an oval desk and other office material. Seated with hands clasped and fingers interlocked, overlooking all of this all the while, is an old woman. Izuku keeps his distance, but that's fine and dandy since his camera does actually have a zoom function despite all of the lies he told Tokuda about using it beforehand. The lady has a stoic and steely expression as she watches a villain fly right into her office, so he supposes the two must already be acquainted, considering her ash blonde hair is slicked back and her attire consists of a suit jacket along with a costly necklace. He's starting to believe there may as well be a commission involved. Well, at least his guess about it being run by some large guy with an escort didn't turn out to be the case. Progress report. The woman's voice is low, but it still carries in the wind well enough to be heard by Izuku's enhanced sense of sound. Even so, the boy cranes his neck and angles his head to turn an ear closer. The villain's voice is just as tonally deep, more so because of the filter in his mask. But it does create quite a tense atmosphere, at least in Izuku's humble opinion. Spider-Man intervened again. The vigilante feels a little tense himself at the mention of his name, but there was still a relative resolution to my assignment this time. Hyun Hachisuka. That name doesn't ring any bells in Izuku's head, but he keeps listening anyways. It turns out that there isn't much to listen to though when a holographic bio appears above the desk between the lady and her Avifona assassin. Izuku snaps a silent shot of the bio. It lists a few aliases Hachisuka went by like Queen Bee at a point. Apparently now, this lady goes by Swarm, considering she's a living hive mind. Izuku supposes that makes enough sense, and then a red X crosses her out, the image fading as the crimson lines cover over the bio. Eliminated, the villain reports her dead. Izuku's heart clenches at that. He starts feeling guilty for not trying to intervene more. Being burned alive can't be a good way to go. Along with the drug, Izuku refocuses at the mention of that trigger stuff they were peddling between themselves and the Yakuza. There must be some sort of power struggle between criminal factions. He thinks. The villain produces a tiny vial, setting it upon the desk. The lenses on Izuku's mask shift between squinting and widening. He doesn't recall this guy snatching any of that stuff during their scuffle. They call me Vulture because I take care of the scraps. Vulture must take some pride in that. Then Trigger can finally be laid to rest with the Shai Hasekai. The commission lady takes the vial and looks at it closely but lacks any actual interest in what she's holding. Vulture nods, moving away from the desk so that he's facing the balcony. Izuku hunches down, worried momentarily that he's been spotted. The red and blue color scheme of his Spider-Man suit seems like it would stand out. Fortunately for him, it somehow doesn't. Vulture doesn't notice that he's being spied on, which must be the reason why he's so comfortable with removing his mask. We can get Night Eye's agency to follow through. The voice filter falters and fails as the helmet dislodges from the man's head. It could prove troublesome if anyone were to find out the number 3 hero was masquerading as a villain. The pro hero Hawks shakes his sweat-slickened blonde hair loose once the beaked helmet is removed. The wind ceases. Spider-Man slips, startled enough to lose his firm foundation of sticking to a building. After he catches himself from falling, he releases a breathless choke of a gasp. It's hard to breathe behind his own mask. Izuku's forefinger falls numbly on the shooter switch of his camera. The DSLR snaps a picture of the unmasked fiend. A hefty heave carries the bag high enough to thud against Tsukachi's desk. All of the yen inside spreads with the landing of the bag's bottom, pushing pens and other materials like the detective's stapler aside to make room for it. Tamakawa pants heavily, having carried the sack of money all the way to the office. Behind him, Eraserhead offers a cup of water. The officer greedily takes it before flitting his tongue to lap it up, much to the underground hero's amusement. "Where'd you get this?" Tsukachi refrains from gawking at how much dough is on his desk currently. It's not likely Tamakawa made a withdrawal from an ATM while he was out, though he doubts an enforcer of the law would rob a bank either. The Yakuza. Tamakawa breathes out his answer eventually enough, though that only raises other questions until further elaboration is given. Spider-Man was holding it. The officer gestures with his free hand as though to demonstrate that it's clean and he's not the thieving type. Guess the papers are right about him turning over a new leaf from vigilantism to crime after all. Tsukachi doesn't keep himself in check anymore and allows a grievance sigh to escape his downturned lips. "How did you get a hold of it then?" Eraserhead prompts Tamakawa to keep sharing details. As he does, the underground hero simultaneously works on refilling the cop's cup of water. "He, threw it at me." Tamakawa pauses as he recalls the order of events. Suddenly he's itchy behind the ears and he needs to scratch at his head. "So what you're saying is," he tossed the money bag back. Eraserhead crosses his arms over his chest while giving Tsukachi a quick glance. The detective swallows and nods. "What else did Spider-Man do?" Tsukachi looks between the bag of yen and his partner while reconsidering his opinion on the web-patterned person. He actually looked to be feuding with the Yakuza. Tamakawa hums while trying to come up with his own theory on what transpired. Could it be some sort of inter-gang dispute? Eraserhead refrains from face-bombing. He's had students brighter than this. "Not likely," the underground hero deadpans. But rather than waste any more time spelling things out for the officer, he heads for the window to carry out his own fieldwork. "I'll be in touch." "Sure thing." Tsukachi nods despite the man's back being turned to him. After Eraserhead is gone, he looks back down at the bag to find the vigilante's usual calling card is left inside. "Thought you could use a raise in your allowance. Courtesy of your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man." Not even nightfall can cool the summer shimmer in the air. Ripples of erosion waft through puddles and potholes. Dust mounds roll and billow into shadowed crevices. Moths flutter as they struggle to remain stagnant within a lampost's tint of yellow light. It's a repeated array of those miniature beams and even smaller ponds that forge a path for Tokuda to terrain. And it's that trail that he follows to his parked car. He stops short so that he can unlock its doors. But before the man can fish his car keys out from his pants pocket, he catches a glimpse of something in his peripheral vision. A red and blue blur. A colored haze that comes to a halt atop his car and perches itself there, once becoming clear. Tokuda instinctively staggers back, startled, and drops his keys the way someone might do in a horror movie. As Spider-Man, Tokuda fights the urge to take his glasses off and clean them to make sure that what he is seeing is legit. Instead, he opts for pushing the bifocals up the bridge of his nose in order to readjust the lens over his eyes. To what do I owe the pleasure? It takes him a moment to regain his composure, but he manages to do so nevertheless. Contrary to popular belief about the youth these days, I myself do a little more reading than just manga. Spider-Man starts by trying to smooth out the strangeness with a joke, but he can see that it's more of a miss than a hit when Tokuda doesn't laugh. Resting on his haunches, he goes for making his body language less intimidating instead. "You like to write about me quite a bit." He also tries keeping his voice even to not make it sound like he's upset or anything, though Tokuda is more occupied trying to place the familiarity of the vigilante's voice rather than the tonal vibe of it. He nods nonetheless, agreeing with Spider-Man's sentiment. "You're hot and fresh news that sells." The photojournalist pauses to consider what he says or does next before daring to add, "Especially what with your whole turning over a new leaf." "You got it all wrong." Spider-Man shakes his head. "I'm still just a guy trying to do good and only good." The vigilante clarifies his vigilante status with enough waving of his hands to show he's genuinely passionate about emphasizing that point. "There was a whole misunderstanding with this other person posing as me, and then another misunderstanding with me holding a bag of money that wasn't mine, and now everyone thinks I'm their not-so-friendly neighborhood Spider-Man." One corner of Tokuda's mouth twitches with amusement as he holds back a smile. "Is that why you're here? To set the record straight?" He bends down to pick his keys up off the ground now that he feels safe enough to take his eyes off the masked figure. "I don't presume you'd be open to an interview about it." But he still makes sure to right himself quickly and continue making eye contact with the strange lens on that mask. Spider-Man physically recluses at the mention of an interview. Ooh, not quite. But there's a hint of humor from him about the prospect too. Tokuda is glad that he returned his field of vision to the vigilante when the spider-clad do-gooder makes a move from point A to point B, point A being Tokuda's car and point B being the post that's a few feet closer. But while we're talking about sharing the truth, That does have something to do with why I'm here. The vigilante's fingers wriggle between the material waistline of his spandex to procure something. Tokuta's eyebrows raise when he sees what Spider-Man has to give him are printed pictures. He takes them, a little hesitantly, but can't help letting curiosity get the better of him to have a look. Where'd you get these? It starts as an honest question probing for an honest answer, but then he sees what it is that he's actually looking at. This is. Our mutual contact has his ways. Spider-Man keeps it vague, but Tokuta gets the hint. Midoriya. The shot composition is familiar enough now that he looks at the photos closer, but Tokuta has to swallow some saliva to keep his mouth from running dry when making that connection. Amazing shots for a story are one thing, but how the kid got them is another. Yeah, but I think we both know why I'm the one giving these to you and not him. Spider-Man sounds a little more reserved now, which would be odd by contrast with his personality upon introduction. But Tokuta can understand somewhat under this set of circumstance. Tokuta breathes a husky breath out through his mouth, something much heavier than a sigh. It makes sense why keeping anonymity with such a sensitive subject being brought to light is essential. The poor kid would be put in grave danger otherwise. Hero society is one thing, but society in general and how they'll react is another thing entirely. Hawks, the number 3 ranked hero, is secretly operating as a well-known villain. And the one to expose that information is Izuku Midoriya, or rather, now, Tanio Tokuta. Why come to me with this? Why not a bigger press? Tokuta hides the compromising images in his coat as though somebody is spying on them. Considering the situation, someone may very well be. Tokuta glances about, becoming slightly paranoid. But what Spider-Man does next clears the man's mind completely. Spider-Man hops down to stand like a normal person and says, "Because Midoriya trusts you more to do the right thing with it." The sincerity in that statement slamming Tokuta enough to jar his thoughts. And so do I. Spider-Man holds out his hand. It takes Tokuta a moment to realize what the gesture is for, but he does take the extended hand and he does shake it. He steals and resolves himself, regaining his nerve. Then I guess it's up to me not to let you down. The photojournalist gives Spider-Man a lopsided smile. "Oh, you mean each of us, me and Midoriya?" Spider-Man cocks his head to the side, somewhat tracking that smile. "Right." Tokuta winks at the vigilante. The eyes on Spider-Man's mask widen ever so slightly. He doesn't say anything for a second before the lenses return to their usual size and he begins backing away. "Right." The vigilante clears his throat with a feigned cough. "Right." Before performing a backflip and crawling back into the shadows that he came from. No matter how gently he closes the door, it still shuts with a resounding click. The snap of the lock makes him wince, and as though to confirm he should be worried about his mother overhearing his arrival back home, the lights to the room flick on so suddenly that a flash grenade may as well have gone off. Izuku's eyes don't need to fully recover from the shock of bright adjustment for him to know it's his mom standing by the light switch. She has one arm crossed over her stomach, the one holding the light switch moving to fold over and join it. "You're late." She states the obvious, but Izuku still acts strangely surprised. The boy gives his mom a sheepish smile. "Really? I didn't notice." His smile wavers when his mom raises an eyebrow. Her eyes move to a window, his eyes darting to track her glance. It's pitch black outside. Izuku has to swallow to keep his jaw from unhinging. Is it not daylight savings time? But that means being able to talk and say something stupid that'll dig him a deeper grave. He knows he messed up and made things worse when Inko's gaze comes back to him with a hardness to it. She practically glares right into his soul. "This is beginning to become a bad habit of yours." She speaks sternly enough that Izuku knows better than to keep joking around about the subject matter. "I know, Mom, I really did just lose track of time though." He knows it isn't the greatest of excuses, but there's not much of an alternative. Subconsciously, Izuku adjusts the collar of his shirt to be pulled up a little higher on his neck, a subtle move to hide his spider-themed spandex beneath it. "Where do you go when you stay out so late?" Inko's stare softens as she uncrosses her arms to reach out with. She moves to grab him, maybe give him a hug. Is it a girl that you're sneaking off to go see?" But Izuku jumps back to avoid getting caught up in it. "What? No, Mom, no." He feels his face flush red from embarrassment. He'd rather get accused of being Spider-Man than have to go through any sort of girl talk with his mom. Well, maybe not, but the pros and cons of either difficult conversation compare surprisingly close. Inko notices his physical reaction, withdrawing a bit to give him some space. She holds her hands up as a sign that she doesn't mean to put any pressure on him, but she's quite literally backed him into a corner. "Okay, is it a boy then?" Her change of pace, slow and steady approach is a bit too cautious for his liking now. "No." Izuku buries his face in his hands. He's not even able to look his own mom in the eyes anymore. Yet, he can feel her presence lingering over him even without his spider sense, and that's only making things worse that he forces himself to look at her again anyways. Inko backs up a bit, something Izuku is grateful for, but she still doesn't let it go. "It's okay, Izuku, I really don't care whether." "Mom." Izuku interrupts her before that line of conversation can go any further. Romance is one thing but sexuality is another. Can we please just drop it? He all but pleads for her to stop. Inko is hesitant but ultimately agrees with a nod. Fine, she sighs and finally allows him some more breathing room with a complete backup. We'll put a pin in it for now. Thank you. Izuku releases his own sigh, one full of relief. But that was a mistake. He really should have known better than to lower his guard. But I think it's still time that I tell you about the birds and the bees. Inko unknowingly gives her son some equivalent of a heart attack with that suggestion, just to be safe. Izuku has to brace himself against the wall to keep from falling flat on his face. I've already had enough birds and bees for one day. His grumbled mumble of complaint leaves his mouth before he can think better of himself to utter it aloud. You what? Inko does a complete 180 to face her son again when she hears what he said about birds and bees, which sends Izuku into a flustered tizzy of flailing his arms around. Wait, Mom, it's not what you think. He squeaks, each protest a higher decibel than the last until his screams shift into screeches. Inko doesn't let her baby boy get away with playing innocent. Not this time. She tackles him to the floor, where she wrestles the reckless youth to make sure he doesn't re-escape, and prepares to teach him a lesson or two, even if she has to silence his shouts by shoving a bar of soap into his mouth in order to clean it.